So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the worst of all possible worlds, the first and only podcast unafraid to raise... What the fuck is his name?
Shaman?
Shalman?
The first and only
Shulman.
podcast unafraid to raise Shalman from the depths of hell. I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And joining us today is someone you may have heard of, Scott Benson. He's done some things.
Hi, I'm Scott Benson. I've done some things.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm an illustrator and an animator and a video game developer. If you know me, you probably know me from a game called Night in the Woods that I was co-director and writer on.
Awesome.
And illustrator. I did a bunch of stuff on that game. So yeah.
I've actually heard Brian describe Night in the Woods as the Zapazoids of the Trump era.
It's true. Yeah. I think that it's for babies. I can totally see an Adventures in Odyssey, Night in the Woods, like through line of like small town, somewhat removed, but fairly close knit, with a surprising number of things going down.
I still don't know
town.
what's in the basement of Wits End, and I just assume that it's a Lovecraftian monster that they're feeding some of the employees to.
Well, there's all those like tunnels. I don't know how deep and dank into Adventures in Odyssey lore all of you are, but there's tunnels and
AJ's not as clued into the tunnels just yet.
We don't want to
right.
let him know all of it yet. So just for a little bit of background, too, this actually is a really nice pivot. In terms of
the world is that a pivot?
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing.
I'm terrified of where this is going.
No. We're talking a little bit about like our backgrounds with this show and how much we know or do not know about the show. So, when I was talking to you about coming on, immediately as I mentioned, we do a thing about Adventures in Odyssey, and you were like, "Oh shit, I know Adventures in Odyssey." So that in and of itself was exciting. Yeah. Why don't you tell us first a little bit about like what your background is? Because also, just to clear this for people who haven't listened to the show before, this is called Wits Endless Summer. It is a sub-series of The Worst of All Possible Worlds where we review the children's radio drama Adventures in Odyssey, which is created by Focus on the Family, an evangelical Christian organization based out of Colorado Springs, Colorado, 80995.
God, I knew it too. As soon as she said Colorado Springs, Colorado.
They have their own zip code. They're like the Empire State Building. You can just write to it.
Yeah, I was brought up in like conservative evangelical culture in like technically the 80s into the 90s, but I was aware of the culture in like late 80s through the 90s. So like the whole 9 yards, we were like listening to Carmen.
Hell yeah.
I wasn't allowed to listen to like any like secular music really, aside from like one tape I had of like the Supremes that I loved as a kid. So I was like bopping around either listening to that or like whatever, like Sandy Patty or something, just this very like heavy like late 80s Christian pop stuff that was either like bad novelty songs or it was like someone doing a very tearful rendition of like How Great Thou Art or something kind of deal. And then
did you have Ellen Root? Was that part of your upbringing? I'm just curious. As long as we're talking about shitty Christian children's novelty songs.
No, I don't think I have.
Okay.
What's the? Can you clue me in on that?
Well, his best known song is probably one called "You Can't Make a Chicken from Soup." It's about evolution.
Oh shit! Yeah. As soon as you said that, I was like, I know immediately what that's about because I recognize terrible anti-evolution.
Can't be
Amazing.
real.
It's real.
Can't be a real
This is
song.
one of those things that was in the Calvinist side of things. I think, like the Donut Man. I did not grow up with this.
It's real. It's my friend, and I'm going to force you to listen to it later on, AJ.
The world of like Christian music novelty songs is like, so yeah, that was kind of like Carmen's whole deal. I'm assuming most of you, if you're familiar with Adventures in Odyssey, you're probably familiar with Carmen.
So AJ of our group is actually not very familiar with Adventures in Odyssey.
I was raised a dirty papist, so.
Oh shit. The writer of one of the episodes today became a dirty papist later on.
That's right.
Oh, is that true?
Paul McCusker.
Yeah, Paul McCusker.
Yeah,
he did.
He over time went Anglican and then decided that's not enough. And after a conversation with a famous Catholic convert who went to Calvin College.
Hey, let's
which
go.
Josh and I
Let's
both attended.
go.
This is gonna. I don't know if this counts as hate speech, but I feel like I have a hard time occasionally understanding people who became Catholics as adults.
It's very strange.
Especially if it happened after the year like 2001.
Yeah, like I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing. Like my wife, like similar, occasionally like will like meet someone and they're like, oh yeah, then I joined. I was like not brought up in the church, but I joined at like 25. We both look at each other like, oh, okay, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. I'm happy for you and everything. However, most people we know who are raised Catholic have either like sort of forgotten it, or it's just kind of a thing that they sort of do traditionally, or they are like desperately trying to escape the hard line like baggage they carry afterwards.
And the Catholic Church has no baggage whatsoever. Like
no,
notoriously,
it's a perfectly upstanding organization.
Yeah, I think the scariest people are the people who converted to Catholicism after Benedict got elected Pope. Like they were just waiting for that moment that Benedict got elected, and then
they were just actual Nazis as well.
And then left when Francis took over.
Right.
I do really enjoy that it has created a whole like online subculture of people who like would really rather just be following that Pope Michael guy who lives in Texas or whatever.
I mean, look, all of these people are complete freaks, and ultimately, we are not here to talk about them fundamentally. We are here to talk about the
Totally
Odyssey.
different set of freaks.
It's true, yeah.
A different set of freaks.
Yeah.
The Protestant freaks.
The regular freaks. But as such, I wasn't allowed to like listen to a lot of like radio, but I was allowed to listen to Christian radio stations, which means I'm like, oh sweet, I'm like 8 years old, got to listen to Insight for Living now. I wonder what Chuck Colson has to say. And one of those shows was Focus on the Family, and so we'd listen to Focus on the Family all the time. And I had not heard that like fucking asshole James Dobson's voice for like 20 years until this week, and it came on, and I was just like, oh,
yeah, it's
God.
like it's such a horrible voice.
It's a stuffed animal, a southern stuffed animal voice. He's like, hey, what's up? Hey, let's turn I can't do it. Like it's a very sort of like I'm gonna flip the chair around and talk to you kind of kid.
How's it
show
going, kids?
guy.
Yep.
Yeah, he's from Louisiana originally, but his accent is sort of a relaxed Texan accent.
He's got that.
It's like a slight twang with mostly California sensibility.
I was going to say there's quite a bit of California there as well because of the fact, of course, that he matriculated at USC and pretty much started.
Worked for a Southern Californian eugenicist at the beginning of his career.
That sounds about right. He and it was just on afterwards, and so I was like, oh, what's this? I'm a kid and I enjoy dramas, I guess, and so. And then it is like if you were like in that culture of the time, it's a fairly charming show to get into when you're like 8, because you're like,
cute.
oh, there's like all these characters and all this stuff going on, and there's drama, and then occasionally the NSA's there for some reason.
Right.
And,
well, and as we've talked about before, the theme song slaps. So when you hear that leading into it, you're like, ooh, this will be fun. What a whimsical time.
The most optimistic sounding song that has ever been written. It's just like, wow, this is amazing. I'm walking out into a regular ass American small town. Unbelievable. It's that it has that kind of Stardew Valley vibe of the this is a self-sustaining community of ethical small business owners.
Right.
Listening to it again, that was one of the things that leapt out to me most, was just because I know the show kind of took great pains to be quote unquote apolitical. Like I think someone asked Whit about it at one point, overtly, and I think Whit was like, "Well, I don't like any candidate or something." I forget what it was.
So there are now 3 Whits in total. So there was Hal Smith, who is the one that we're listening to in these episodes.
Right.
Who was Whit until about 94.
Oh,
93.
right. Okay, yeah.
And when he regenerated, Wit's End blew up. It shot just beams of energy out of him. And
AJ, you don't know how correct you are.
I was gonna say, so because Wit's End has been blown up a few times, I think. Yeah. It is a weird show because it's half like, I adopted a puppy, but it was too much of a responsibility, and that's why we should always keep our promises, because that's what the Lord says, versus a terrorist group has infiltrated Odyssey and is holding someone hostage, and Wit's End, the fucking center of life and light in the universe, has exploded and fallen into the earth, and Mr. Whitaker is dead!
So Hal Smith passed away, and then Paul Herlinger was like a PBS narrator, who then got a job at Adventures in Odyssey. He retired in 2008, died 2 years later, and then they got the current Wit, whose name is Andre Stoica, who is just terrible.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to a full
I
episode
popped
from this era
on
yet.
to
But
listen to the most recent episode I could find, and yeah, it is jarring.
From the perspective of the writers, because they love telling this story, is that, Hal Smith kicked it, and they were freaking out for a bit because they were like, well, what are we going to do? Whit is dead. What is Adventures in Odyssey without Whit? And somebody heard Paul Hurlinger's voice and tipped the Focus on the Family producers to be like, this guy could do the job. And then they called him, and I think it was Paul McCusker who got on the phone with Paul Hurlinger, heard him just say hello, and was like, oh my God, that's the voice of Whit. And they do sound very similar. And Paul Hurlinger actually gives, I think, and we haven't gotten there yet, and these are Hal Smith episodes, but his performance, I think, is overall a better performance.
yeah.
The funny thing about it is that the guy, Hal Smith, he was like the voice of, I guess, Winnie the Pooh and Owl, and the guy, the guy who replaced him, was the guy who replaced him in those voices, or at least one of those voices, and so like. So is Owl in Winnie the Pooh like canonically like a Republican at this point, or like he's gonna be like oh Pooh, let's talk to you about the dangers of peer pressure when it comes to sexual immorality at age 15.
Well, speaking of peer pressure and sexual immorality, that's a great way to get into this first episode that we have on our docket, which is First Love, which aired in April of 1990. We are now in the gay 90s.
All right.
We have a nice new orchestration of the opening theme.
Yeah.
That they then
Sounds a
revert
lot better.
back to like an older version, but like the MIDI is better and the arrangement is better.
We're now on an episode that I was actually alive for, so that's fun.
Yeah.
How about that?
I
wasn't.
I think I was 8, around about 8.
I'm as fresh as a spring chicken.
You really missed out on this shit. I'm just telling you.
Listening to it
I had it
live,
on tape.
there's
you really
nothing
had
that
to be
compares.
there for it.
So
George
this
H.W. Bush was president. All was well.
This
Yeah,
episode starts out with Chris letting us all know, Chris the narrator, letting us know that Connie's about to come face to face with a difficult decision.
Dick or the Lord?
They're also doing intro sections, which I found very interesting. Like this is the first.
AJ, you hadn't heard one of those before. They do little like previews for the episode you're about to listen to.
Yeah.
What I like about that is that I don't have to listen to the rest of the episode. It's like the YouTube trailer before the actual trailer.
It's
I
a
got
very
it.
dense and nuanced show, though. It's like it's the Karamazov of people who owned McGee and Me tapes.
We start off at a high school baseball game. At least I assume it's a high school baseball game against Connellsville, which of course is Odyssey's crosstown rival. We got this guy.
Connellsville.
Fuck him.
Yeah.
We've got this guy named Jeff Lewis, and Jeff Lewis is Odyssey's all-star. It's the classic high-stakes baseball situation. It's full count, bottom of the ninth. They're down by 2 with 1 runner in scoring position. Naturally, of course, Jeff hits the home run. It's a walk-off because it's the bottom of the ninth, of course, and so that gets them into the playoffs. Very exciting. And Connie's friend Cheryl is dating a man named Dan Williamson, who's also on the team. And
Sorry, these people are like 14, aren't they?
yeah, not a man. I don't know why I said man. It's because they sound
they're
like
all
men.
played by like 27-year-olds.
No,
so
exactly.
It's the Riverdale effect. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just to clarify, is this baseball team the Coyotes that they mentioned before?
No,
This
the
is
Coyotes
not?
are a
Okay.
little league
No, the
team.
Coyotes are Little League.
Yeah.
Okay, because if Heather Bollock was going to be in this episode with her fucking Halliburton dad, I would have walked out. Like I can't handle it.
No, this is a bit more advanced. Connie's friend Cheryl dating Dan Williamson. He's also on the team, so they all meet up by the locker room. Connie meets Jeff. They hit it off, and he's like, "Hey, you want to come to a party at my place?" She has to ask Whit because apparently Whit is Connie's guardian while her mom is out of town.
I think this is the clip I have. Let me grab it.
Hey, my mom dropped us off for the game. We need to take Connie home, okay?
Yeah, that's okay, but,
What's wrong?
well, there's nothing wrong. It's just that Jeff Lewis is having a victory celebration at his house tonight, and I thought we could all go.
Jeff's having a party?
Yeah, what do you say?
I guess it'd be all right. Connie, you want to call your mom?
Well, she went out of town on business today. You know, those weekend management seminars she's involved with.
Of course.
Then you can
course.
come.
Well, I have to check in with Whit. He's my guardian while she's away. But I think he'll let me go.
Of course he will. He wouldn't let you miss one of the famous Jeff Lewis victory celebrations, would he?
The cadence of
Hi,
these
Jeff.
children, how they speak.
Jeff, this is Connie Kendall. Connie, meet Jeff Lewis, our star hitter.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
That was quite a home run. How do you do it?
With my eyes closed. I wouldn't have the nerve otherwise.
Dobie Gillis
so,
over
are
here.
you guys coming or what?
Well, what do you do at a Jeff Lewis victory celebration?
Oh, we play games like Parcheesi, maybe Twister. And then we break out the lemonade and sing old camp songs. Oh, you'll love it. Come on.
How is that a joke for the show?
That's not funny.
It's really not.
But I mean, that is what they do.
Right.
It's canonical that the only thing that like young people are able to do in Odyssey is Bible Bowl.
That's
Yeah.
right. And also, victory celebrations is a real phrase that humans use in conversation.
The way that these kids talk, it's just like, so I telephoned my friend Paul, and I said to Paul, we're going to go to the theater this weekend. But Paul, he's taken sick, just like his mother did last year. Or something. It's just this weird kind of like, this just sounds like 30-somethings from like a 1940s TV show discussing like their adult lives and concerns. Like one of them is just going to complain about being divorced or something.
That's why in my brain, I think I mentally identified Jeff as a man. He's not a man. He's a teenager, but
Yeah, no, it's like you expect them to answer the phone and say, oh, hoy, hoy.
This is kind of the thing, though, like, particularly this, like, kind of brand of conservative Christianity specializes in turning children into slightly neurotic middle-aged people.
Right.
Like, at a really young age, who are, like...
It's very successful.
Who are, like,
I
really
am
up on,
one.
like, social norms of, like, 50 years ago.
This shit fucked me up for real, Scott. And
It's how I imagine, like, comic strips that run daily in newspapers that have been going on forever. That's
like
just
Family Circus, yeah.
No, more like the drama ones, like Mary Worth or something. That's just how I imagine them talking. Hyper squeaky clean.
Right.
No, I mean, I was also like super like, I mean, same as far as just the background. I mean, I was actually in ministry until I was like 30, and then I like lost the faith and kind of left that. So I have this like very lengthy. I mean, I was a cool progressive Christian by that point, so it was all right. I could have been on this podcast then, okay, but no. So I ended up losing my faith and like kind of leaving it. And there was that kind of like not deprogramming, but there was that thing of the like, oh wow, this has been carrying around a lot of shit from shows like this.
Right.
My whole life.
It's like a breakup, and it's like not necessarily a bad one, but it's one where like months later, years later, you're like, oh yeah, I don't that aspect of my life is gone now.
Yeah.
And then you just realize it, and you're like, oh, well, fuck.
And Connie goes to the party, but isn't having a great time. It's a bit too much of a party. Jeff's parents are out of town. There's drinking going on. Jeff actually has his own personal little shack out in the woods behind the house, apparently. And
come with me to my shack in the woods.
That was ill-defined what that building was.
What was that?
I didn't care for the way he kept saying Dan and Cheryl.
Yeah.
Dan.
God.
Cheryl.
He's just... He's just like, yeah, my parents built this for me out here, and then like that's
the exposition.
He goes there on the full moon. That's where he has
trophies.
That's where he takes all his friends.
Right. And in that shack, Connie and Jeff really start hitting it off. Jeff basically says, "Hey, do you want to go out on a date with me?"
And I got the clip.
Connie.
Yeah?
I'm sorry you're not having a good time at the party.
It's your house. Well, your parents' house. I guess they can afford to pay for the damage.
It's not usually so crazy. Look, I'm not real good at this, but could I see you? I mean, like, could we go out
in
together?
The nude?
On a date?
Jeff, you're doing fine, buddy. You're fine.
I have to work tomorrow night until 9.
How about Sunday?
Well, I go to church in the morning.
Then Sunday night.
I'm back at church again.
Rack 'em.
Twice on Sunday?
Twice?
It's too much.
Then how about Sunday afternoon?
Too much church.
We could have a picnic up at Trickle Lake or something.
I like the idea that anyone in this town is surprised that someone they meet is hell of Christian. Like,
this is a town.
You're a Christian, you go to church? Weird. And it's like, have you been to the one business in town that has a Bible room?
Right. Well, she even says, like, do you know what's in? He's like, doesn't everybody?
Yeah. Like,
this is a town of 30,000 people in the middle of most likely Ohio, where the most influential person in the entire community is John Avery Whitaker.
Who is, might as well. I was trying to explain to my wife about this show, and I was like, then there's like Mr. Whitaker, and I don't know how to describe him other than like everyone's kindly not father who is also the spiritual leader and small business owner, prime small business owner. And also he was in the NSA, and he's also started a global publishing empire at some point.
Which is also the NSA.
Which is also fun for the NSA. She's like, what is the show? And I'm like, it's a show about learning lessons as children.
I would like to just for a second talk about the utter sadness that is Jeff Lewis for a minute.
Okay.
He's showing off a lot of his what he describes as trinkets and souvenirs, which is a weird thing for a 15-year-old to have. But he also
okay, wow, just hit me where it hurts.
Well, it's weird to refer to them as trinkets and souvenirs.
Yeah, that's who is this 80-year-old teenager?
These are my tchotchkes.
Yeah, picked him up at a garage sale, half off the other day. He also says at one point, like, he's like, "Oh, look at the trophies case," and he's like, "Yeah, those mean nothing to me."
Yeah,
and I'm like, this poor kid, his whole life is sports, and already accomplishment in it means nothing.
It's
like,
kind of implied as well that the only reason he really does it is because of his dad, right? Like that is his family is the one who's kind of pressuring him into being the sports guy, but he doesn't love it.
Was anyone this, like, one of the things that creeps me out about this episode is that, like when I was, like, you know, dating or attempting to date at age, like, 14, 15, however nebulously old these people are.
Yeah.
You know, 14 going on 37 in 1942. But at that age, you're such, like, a weird, gawky little, just complete failure at everything at that age. And these people are so together and so, like, precise in their thoughts and motivation. It is, that's so creepy to me, actually. I'm like, you're kind of missing everything that's actually mortifying about dating or trying to do anything at this age.
I think part of that, though, is to do with the fact that this is not actually a show for teenagers. This is a show for children, and what they're trying to do is sort of frame up an understanding of what it might be like eventually to have to get to the point where you have to consider dating. But
it's like in 7 or 8 years when you're at this point, keep this in mind.
So I think it's portrayed with a certain simplicity for that reason. But I agree with you. I mean, when I was a teenager, being a good Christian boy, I was a mess, you know, and all teenagers.
Well, it also feels like Odyssey doesn't really like to delve into that mess, and when it does, I think it actually gets its most successful episodes, like the one where Whit beats his grandson. And there's an actual like confrontation between his daughter and himself, like that. When it actually gets into the grind, that's when it's most interesting. But this is a show that is, this particular episode is not willing to like delve into like the messiness of teenage sexuality.
There's even an episode about dating and marrying a non-Christian much later, like in 1995 or 1996, like right before the second Whit shows up.
Yeah, there's at least one more, because I remember
that
one
covers
involving
this a lot more thoroughly.
And there's also is that the character of Mitch who shows up later on? Because
that's not Mitch. Mitch is a Christian. It's Jason when he was gonna marry Tasha.
Right.
Tasha, and their cauldron of everything.
And then Jack talks about the nightmare of marrying his non-Christian wife, who had a stroke and maybe converted the night before she died, but probably didn't.
Tasha,
so he doesn't know if she's in hell until the moment that he dies.
Tasha, a.k.a. Millhouse, which is great.
No.
Oh, no.
Millhouse.
No, that's Katrina. I'm sorry.
Katrina, Eugene's.
Whatever.
I'm sorry. I'm the Adventures in Odyssey encyclopedia.
No, this is great. The Universal Encyclopedia.
Great burden.
Or whatever.
Universal Press.
Universal Press.
Universal Press. So instead of having Jack, of course, in that horror story, we just get Whit really grilling Connie
going
on a date
he's
with
so
this.
fucking intense right off the jump.
It's creepy.
Yeah. And she also has just gotten back from mopping the Bible room. And why does the Bible room need that much mopping?
There is so much mess in the Bible room constantly. It's a mop type mess.
Someone's coming in to see me, that's all.
But not the president.
No.
A friend?
Sort of. I met him last night.
Him? Oh, I see.
Now, Whit, don't get any ideas. He's just a friend.
Well, did I say anything?
No, but you adults are all the same. I told my mom about it on the phone this morning, and she automatically assumed I'm in love with the guy.
I wouldn't assume any such thing.
You wouldn't?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the love at first sight idea. It's dangerous. The love is supposed to be nurtured over time as you get to know the person.
Exactly. All he asked me to do is go on a picnic tomorrow.
What's his name? Maybe I know him.
Jeff Lewis?
Lewis. Oh, sounds familiar. Does he go to church?
Well...
he doesn't go to church?
She doesn't even let her answer. Does he go to church? Oh, he doesn't, huh?
I don't know.
Oh, I see.
It's just for a picnic.
But they do end up going on the picnic. Jeff,
she makes a bologna and ketchup sandwich.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Jeff ends the relationship right there.
Should have. Jeff gives Connie a kiss on the cheek, and now she's like, now she's got butterfly.
Yeah. So.
In Odyssey, though, a bologna and ketchup sandwich is equivalent to a filet mignon.
So my question for everybody here is, was there this much pushback to you dating a non-Christian growing up?
Yes, if not
I didn't
more.
date.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very, very, very. I ended up in one of the I Kiss Dating Goodbye churches.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that book, too.
I did the like True Love Waits program in Sunday school and youth group.
Did you sign a pledge?
I did. I got the little necklace. That's such a weird thing. But like that, we didn't read I Kiss Dating Goodbye, but the main discourse around it was just do courtships. Right. Just do group dates. I'll do group dates.
Courtship is such a weird rabbit hole of courtship in evangelical Christianity in like the late 90s into the 2000s, because it's a very particular subcultural idea of relationships and marriage, and it's one of those things that like I've occasionally, because I was talking recently with someone about Josh Harris, who's gone through his whole thing recently.
And by the way, just for context for listeners who aren't aware about Josh Harris or courtship, because I do want to clear that up front.
Come on, familiar with this.
Josh Harris is an author who wrote a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, where he advocates for this idea of courtship, which is rather than going out on dates, you basically identify somebody who you like, and the only real interactions you have with them before you get married are going to be largely chaperoned and definitely completely pure.
If I'm remembering correctly, he wrote that book when he was 20 years old. He was just barely into college after being homeschooled his whole life. And he was raised by like an evangelical author.
But it ended up...
His father was also an evangelical.
It ended up being very culturally successful. But then a few years ago, he ended up being like, that book is bullshit, and you absolutely should not follow any of the advice in that book.
And
he was a pastor. He left his church. He left the faith. He got divorced.
He's since pivoted to being a sort of branding coach in the most like insufferable manner possible. There's a documentary post him disavowing the book, but pre him kind of like leaving.
Yeah, when it was filmed, he was still a Christian, and then right before the release happened, he was like, "By the way, I'm not a Christian now," and it ruined the marketing for the movie.
It is a insufferable movie. Like,
it's terrible.
It is about how incredibly brave Josh Harris is for getting rich off of being wrong, basically. But I was part of that church, and so which is the Sovereign Grace Ministries, and they were called something else. They were originally called PDI, which is People of Destiny International, which is some amazing church branding.
That sounds like a cult.
Yeah. But Josh Harris was a minister in that church, so it was like, this was absolutely just the thing. And that same kind of True Love Waits kind of upbringing, it just absolutely fucks people up, like really, really, really terribly bad.
I remember, first of all, before I say this, I just wanted to point out that I'm definitely going to make a Bungie fan Discord server called People of Destiny International.
There you go.
But the thing that I remember about...
Sora will join, People of Destiny Islands. Who is this for?
We could it's for me, AJ.
It's a nice Venn diagram, ever getting smaller.
Kingdom Hearts, Adventures in Odyssey, Bungie.
And just Bosch right at the center.
Let's go. So I remember reading that book, Scott. In fact, a copy of it was in my church library, and I read it when I was probably like 11 or so.
That's such a terrible time to start drilling that shit in your brain.
For that,
What I remember ultimately from like right after I hit puberty all the way up until like middle of the time that I was in college was just constantly wrestling with myself in this idea that like, if I had any sort of like baser carnal desires or like I wanted to do something, that was not seeing my sisters in Christ as the, I'm not protecting their...
You're not guarding their heart.
That's exactly right. And this is not, and I also did abstinence-only sex education in school. And did you ever do the thing where, did you ever see the visualization where you've got a construction paper hearts and you put a little bit of glue on the hearts and you put them together and you tear them apart again? And it's like, oh no, some of this heart got on this heart.
I did it with tape. where you put it on your skin and everyone passes the strip of tape around and
it gets less sticky. Yeah,
There were so
which is
many
what happens
versions
to
of that.
your dick and vagina if
Yeah.
you have too much sex. It becomes less sticky.
Anyway, this is not an episode, obviously, about sexual temptation or anything like that. They keep it very pure. They keep it very G-rated because, they have to. It's a children's show.
It's really about why believers should not have strong social relationships with non-believers.
Right.
But like we're allowed to humor them and like have them in our presence, but the goal should always be to evangelize to them.
And ultimately,
and if you're not doing that, and if you're not going to church on Tuesday nights, did anyone else go to church on Tuesday nights?
No, Wednesdays.
Depending, sometimes Wednesdays.
Oh, okay.
And that doesn't involve youth group, which might have been also any night of the week, including Fridays.
Never heard of that before. Yeah.
It really boggles my mind because up until I think in universe 3 months ago-ish, or maybe it's been a year, Connie was not a Christian.
Right.
Yeah.
And seems to have already been brainwashed to the point where she is just denying anyone who is a non-Christian. Like it's
Connie's like, I mortify the flesh now.
Well, I mean, her boss who converted her is her guardian.
Her boss, who is also her legal guardian, who is also the person who controls the entire town's infrastructure and social order. Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
he has the one modem in Odyssey.
her
castle
boss
burned down.
took her into the back room, had her get on her knees in the Bible room, and made her mop up afterwards. Like that is the truth of wit.
This is, and this was considered normal.
Yeah. It's just like, this is fine. All of this is just right.
The fact that he is kind of her guardian while her parents are like, it's weird to have an unofficial guardian.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I got the backup, and it's my employer, who's who's also my spiritual mentor.
Right.
And also that for the entire town, and also our warrior of light against the encroaching darkness.
Who also completely lowballs her on pay.
Yeah.
oh yeah,
Like, he
lowballed
doesn't
the
pay her
hell out
shit.
of her in the initial
Well,
negotiation.
it's because her mom couldn't be around for this episode because, as far as I know, she's not a Christian.
Correct.
Right?
She isn't.
You
Yeah.
can tell because she's in management courses as a woman. Later on, if I remember
Just
correctly,
like Wit's atheist whore daughter.
well, this was later on, not to spoil, but like Wit, there's someone who proposes marriage to Wit, and his entire thing is, well, we disagree on how much God should be involved in politics, and she's like basically more moderate than I am, essentially.
She's a Hillary Clinton stand-in, which is really funny.
She's a total girl boss, and Wit is like, wow, be gone, she devil.
So let's kind of wrap this up. It's a few weeks later now after the little smooch. Cheryl is grilling Connie, Cheryl being Connie's friend. Connie's not going to Bible study every Tuesday night anymore. She's even missing church on Sundays sometimes.
Wow.
And
She's only going to church once on Sunday now.
fucked.
Yeah.
And I actually remember growing up, 3 times a week was my baseline. 2 on Sunday, 1 on Wednesday. Wednesday night was...
And that was service, Sunday school, the
whole
whatever
thing.
youth group or RAs.
Yep.
I just think about the amount of work that poor pastor has to do. Like, how many homilies does that? Or do you guys do?
Generally, you have multiple pastors.
No.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, it really, the amount of effort that a pastor puts in is very contingent upon denomination and individual church. Like, PDA
interesting.
just pops out to give a short thing, or is there the whole
Also, they're
time?
not called homilies, AJ. They're called sermons, just so you know.
Sorry.
I was
Thank
reading
you.
about, not reading, I was listening to the podcast about the collapse of Mars Hill, the Seattle Mars Hill. And I knew people who went to the Mars Hill Church in Albuquerque, and Mark Driscoll would be on the screen. So they would have a regular service, and then the sermon would be Driscoll projected on the screen. And they didn't tape him doing one sermon or doing 2 sermons or something like that. He would do 7 sermons every Sunday.
Wow, that's so stupid.
Yeah, just
That is an extreme amount of
Boggling.
was it kind of like this is the specific word that our Albuquerque franchise location needs to hear, or
Right.
like
I mean, no, it's the same. It's the same thing. It's I think 5 in the morning, and then he does 2 in the evening, where he just does the same sermon 5 times, and then he does it twice.
Actually, Scott, it's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to
true.
God.
It's true. Praise be to God.
Yeah. And also unto you something. Yeah.
Right. So
And also with your spirit now.
and with your spirit.
And also
Yeah, right.
someday.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember, though, feeling some degree of moral superiority, being like, yeah, I go to church 3 times a week. You don't? What the fuck? And that's kind of like what
You
this
even
then...
church, bro?
Yeah, dude.
Including also going to a Christian high school, middle school, going to
Yeah.
chapel.
Yeah.
But it is very similar, AJ. You're right. Like, it's very similar to people who are really annoying about the gym. There are people who are like that about church, and
Yeah,
I was one of
right.
them.
I think that like there is a thing that with kind of evangelical or just very Christian culture that encourages like a degree of like political and sort of like world awareness, like precociousness. So like you are aware of like the eternal and political significance of everything you do at a pretty young age, and you're kind of you're kind of encouraged to be. I just remember going to like a church on like Veterans Day, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but like if you went to Christian school or if you went to like certain churches, like there'd be occasionally like someone who popped up who was like, your cohort age like 11 or 12 who was clearly being groomed to be a preacher.
Yeah, that was me, Scott.
Right, sweet, right. So you know that. So you've been up on stage in a suit talking about shit you have no idea about at age 12. Oh, I was doing that, except for I was being groomed to be the cool, artsy pastor guy. Everything is attached to this intense significance. And when you're kind of brought up in that, I also just went to Christian schools throughout my whole life and involved in church and everything. There are things like the weight of something like, oh, you smooched a non-Christian at age 14. Do you know how important all of that is? It's good or bad. It's the most important thing because everything is incredibly important all the time.
Well, I smooched non-Christians behind.
Yeah. and I think Connie really feels the wrath of that in this scene with Cheryl, because Cheryl just like lays into her for not going to these meetings. Yeah. And what's so interesting to me is that occasionally Odyssey will always like put up like a straw man or like have an argument that like Connie is making against Cheryl in this case that sounds completely reasonable. She's just like, I don't have to go to church twice on Sundays. Like, it's fine. I'm with this guy now, and that's sort of what my life is doing. But, and then Connie at one point says, it isn't any of your business, Cheryl.
And it's not.
It's like, it's really not any of her business.
Establish some boundaries, Connie.
Well, but if you're all brothers and sisters in Christ, it is your business.
Right.
You have to keep them in the family.
And the other thing...
And you have to isolate them from anyone who might pull them away.
You got to focus on the family.
You must focus on the family, specifically in the Calvinist tradition. To go back to your point, Scott, about how like everything needs to be freighted with extreme significance. Everything that happens in your life, at least in Calvinist theology, is God's plan, right? Everything is predestined. It's gonna shake out that way, and that's why it's so important that you stay on. It's this weird like logical illogic where it's like, well, if everything is predestined out for you, then you don't really actually have agency, and it doesn't matter what path you try to stay on because God's either going to keep you on the path or get you off of it. But at the same time, but
he sucks you off.
He sucks you off. But at the same time, though, there's this idea of, well, if you step off the path just a little bit, that could be the beginning of the end. And so like your family, your Christian family has to call you back in. And that's what kind of happens here, because right after Cheryl lays into Connie, Whit lays into Connie.
Whit sneaks up on her, which is
he does.
Jesus. But he basically comes in and says that he's not telling her to do anything when he is in fact telling her to break up with this guy.
And again, what this boils down to is not only saving her soul, keeping it rescued, although, I don't know, in the strain of Protestantism that Adventures in Odyssey tends to walk the line on, she already is saved and that's just going to stay that way.
If they're Calvinist or like Arminianism or something. Exactly.
They're non-Trinitarian.
No, it's focused. They're definitely Calvinists.
Are they? I totally forget where they fall on that.
They've gotta be.
Yeah, they're. I can totally see that though. That makes their focus on individual choice though occasionally makes me think that they're not. But occasionally when I'm sitting around thinking about whether focus on the family is Calvinist or not.
Sounds like a rollicking Sunday to me.
Absolutely.
I do it services.
I do it twice on Sundays.
The other thing is that like they're also trying to rescue Connie from the lifetime of torment that comes from not knowing if your significant other is going to be saved.
Right.
If the person you have built a relationship with, not someone who you fell in love with, someone that you have crafted love with, as Whit says, right? Love is something that you build over time. Yeah. And that love might just end up going to hell with that other person as opposed to entering the kingdom of glory.
Right.
Which, Scott, made me think of when you talked about visiting the studio at Colorado Springs, Colorado 80995. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Right. So I was on tour with my Christian ska band in the summer of 2000.
That rocks.
As you
What
do.
was the name of that band?
I'm not going to. Nobody's ever heard of it. I'll say that.
Great. Okay.
We are thanked on a 5 Iron Frenzy album. That's all I can say. But
That's amazing. That's awesome.
It's amusing. I never get to ever talk about that, but twice on a podcast in the year that has somehow come up, and I don't. Now I'm like worrying if I'm just like name dropping that. If I'm like, oh yeah, I know who 5 Iron. I know.
You were so what you're telling
Reese
us.
Roper? Yeah, good friend.
What you're telling us is that you were a member of the OC Supertones.
Yes, that was it. I replaced. I'm trying to remember any of their names, but we were in Colorado. And in the summer of 2000, and the drummer and the trumpet player were married, and they had like semi-ironically brought a bunch of the Adventures in Odyssey, like the big puffy vacuum seal collections. And it was that thing where we were all very good Christians at the time, but also we were in our early 20s, so we were like, haha, Adventures in Odyssey. There
nice.
Yeah, one of these kinds of things. It looked like it's a Disney VHS from the 80s, but
that's how they get you.
That is how they get you.
And so everyone was doing stuff, and they were like, hey Scott, like we're going through Colorado Springs. Do you totally want to go see like Focus on the Family headquarters? Like at the time, I was like, oh yeah, let's totally go do this. And the funny thing is, I don't know. Now I think of it as, we went semi-ironically, but we didn't. We were all very strong Christians at the time, so maybe it was like, I don't know what in hindsight, I don't know what our actual mode was, because we were going there as kind of like, haha, this is a weird joke, but at the same time, like, we were fucking listening to Adventures in Odyssey in the car as like early 20-somethings, so I don't really know who we thought we were fooling. But yeah, we went through the tour, and we had asked about Adventures in Odyssey, like where it was recorded. We asked the tour guide, and the tour guide's like, oh, that's like on the tour. I'm like, okay. And I remember there being like a playground with like some slides in there and stuff. And I was like, it's like when you go to those places, it's like a children's science center, and you're like, wow, this is just a really nice giant playground. I am jealous of these children. It was kind of like that. And,
did you stop in at the replica Wits End and get yourself a Wadfam chalk sod?
No, because I don't think they had that. This is in 2000. I don't know that they had that at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Wits End stuff came a little bit later.
Yeah, I feel like we would have went, because we went there literally just to see what Adventures in Odyssey content they had. And so we went through the tour, and at the end there was like a little movie, a little like video that you sat through in like a theater, and like the gigantic head of James Dobson, a la the Wizard of Oz, pops up and is just like telling you, and like
just
they make a big point to be
shooting
like,
out. Yeah.
They make a big point to be like, and he has never drawn a salary from the organization ever. It's purely from his books. He's never taken money from this. They just keep telling you that. So as we were walking out, someone, I don't know, one of the fucking Focus on the Family docents or whatever was there and was like, oh, are you the people that were asking about Adventures in Odyssey? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, oh, come here. And so they ushered us kind of down a hallway, and they're like, okay, yeah, here's the studio. Like, and we're like, wow. And he's like, obviously, like, not all of the voice acting happens here, but this is where it's produced. Some of the voice acting happens here, and like some of like the Foley work and all this other stuff. And so, but everyone who's on the show at some point or another has been through here, and we're like, wow, that's cool. And so we were asking a bunch of questions, whatever questions can pop into your head when you're talking to a producer of Adventures in Odyssey randomly. In
like, how many episodes
somewhere.
did Ray Liotta star in?
Yeah, how many? Like, what about the lost episodes? It only aired once for whatever reason. But
I'm sorry, there are lost episodes of Adventures in Odyssey?
Yeah, there's one about abortion that we haven't listened to yet that I've actually never heard.
Yeah, there's a few that were not. There's at least one I know that was never aired again, or was never aired to begin with.
AJ, one of my favorite things about this recording these is just watching your face every time a new piece of information about Adventures in Odyssey is dropped on your head.
Yeah, it is wild, like having conversations like this sort, if like you kind of came up in this culture, because it is stuff that to me, I'm like, that was regrettable but normal.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was actually not normal at all. But
grotesque.
And to me, it's seeing just like the first tentacle of an eldritch god, and then as more and more of it is revealed, you begin to like get the scope of like the actual like cosmic significance of this show.
Yeah.
And it weighs down on me.
It's like a video game where you start off and you're like, okay, well, I've defeated the boss, and then you're like, oh no, that was just merely a henchman of the actual villain at the end of this. And then on disc 3, You kill that guy, and then it reveals the third guy who is actually orbiting the planet in a robot Cthulhu.
Adventures in Odyssey is basically the Dark Souls of. It's a Souls-like radio drama.
100% that.
Honestly, listening to 4 episodes in a row feels like Sekiro, and that I just keep getting murdered over and over and over again.
Yeah. So we're in to finish this up. We're in the studio, and so I guess it was second wit at that point because it was 2000.
Right.
And someone had, I forget who asked something about like, oh yeah, but you had to, replace Mr. Whitaker like not too long ago. It was a few years ago. And the guy's like, yeah, and like he passed away, and we're like, oh yeah. So how was that? Was that hard to like? How do you replace that guy? Somehow it came up that the guy just dropped that guy was not a Christian. That the original wit, as far as he knows,
Hal Smith. Yeah,
Hal Smith was not a Christian, and we were like,
wow.
Oh my god, like that is mind-blowing just because of how that guy has played just the character that guy plays. And especially if you grew up listening to it, it is like, oh, that's weird. And the guy was like, yeah,
he wasn't just wit, he was also Goliath in Davy and Goliath. He had been doing like Christian entertainment for like the last 20 years.
Sorry, that just connected some weird shit in my brain. But
I'm so sorry.
I'm Lutheran Gumby, but brought to you by the United Lutheran Council. I don't think anything good has ever been brought to you by the United Lutheran Council. But
no.
Anyway, but
when
the guy,
Lutherans unite, it's always a problem.
The guy seriously ended it with like, yeah, as far as we know, Mr. Whitaker is in hell. And we were just standing there, just like, just mouths open, and we're like, yeah, and then like everyone just kind of like looked at their shoes for a second.
Awesome.
I mean, I don't disagree.
As far as we know,
I think Hal Smith is in heaven, but
really
Mr. Whitaker is
funny,
in hell.
I thought this was maybe 10 years later, and you were talking about Paul Herlinger, because I'm almost certain Paul Herlinger was also not a Christian. I also think that Andre Stoika, the current wit, is also not a Christian.
What?
I don't think there has ever been a Christian John Avery Whitaker.
I don't know if any of these people are Christians. Like, is Chris a Christian?
Chris is definitely a Christian.
Chris is a Christian.
Chris puts the Chris in Christian.
A lot of these
That's right.
actors are themselves executives that focus on the family. They're producers of the show,
yeah.
or they're the children.
I know that Connie. I looked
up
Connie, and Connie was like, I think I'm trying to remember what Connie's political.
I need to know Connie's politics.
Yeah.
I need to know if I have to cancel Connie.
Well, Connie's been in a zillion things, so like I don't.
Yeah, she was
know.
in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
She's in Totally Spies,
which is unbelievable.
Connie then, Wit pressures Connie.
So Wit is in hell.
Wit's in hell now. Wit pressures Connie into breaking up with Jeff, and she goes back to Jeff's shotgun shack and says, and he's excited because previously there was this little code detector ring toy or whatever, and it was so cool, and they had bonded over it a little bit, and he's like, hey, I want you to have this fun little ring. But no, she says, can't do it, it can't do it. Can't
he
go out
doesn't
with
know
it.
Jesus.
Doesn't know Jesus.
Yeah.
And
decode that, bitch.
And directly after that, takes a one-sided phone call with her mom, explains that, she had to do it. It was the right thing to do. And Mom, will you please come home? And then Chris, of course, wraps up with a nice little pitch to have kids talk to their parents about their dating experiences, about their parents' dating experiences, so that they can understand what it's going to be like, And she says, and I quote, if you love Jesus, then you'll want to go out with someone who loves Jesus too. That's even more important than how they look or how nice they seem to be.
That, children, is called a polycule, and it's the way of the future.
It is certainly.
I just like how nice they seem to be. It's like, sure, he's abusive, but he knows the Lord.
Right.
Yeah. And I just want to be very clear here. I don't like Jeff, especially in this last scene. He's just like, that's not what you're supposed to say. And
he's
I'm like,
he's a little petulant.
He's weird.
Yeah.
But
in
he's
this last
also
scene
sorting
especially.
some things out, and pretty soon he will not be.
Well, right. He's also gay. Like we
And I don't not like him because he's not a Christian. I don't like him.
You don't like him because he's gay. I understand.
Because he's controlling and an asshole in that scene. But I just wanted Connie to have the opportunity to figure that out and be like, oh, this isn't what I want because of those reasons and not because of her newfound cult-like faith in Christianity.
So Connie will not date again until Mitch shows up in the series during the Novacom saga, which does not happen until the Twin Towers fall. She does not date again for another 11 years.
From what I understand, because I looked this up, because I was like, how old are these people? Because they carry it forward, people actually do age. And
Connie ages slower than some characters.
Right. I looked it up, and apparently the official thing from like the behind the scenes book is specifically 2.8 years is 1 year for Connie. So she's like 28 now.
Oh, okay.
Something.
Wow.
In there. Yeah.
It's so weird that they have like that they've codified.
If you've been doing it for that long, you definitely have had that conversation internally.
Right. It's true.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So.
Well, and she's like what, in her 60s, maybe her 70s?
The voice actor,
Katie Lee.
Yeah, I mean she was voicing the fucking gummy bears at one point. Like
she was 26 when Adventures in Odyssey started,
and she actually sounds like a teenager in the earliest episodes. But as time goes by, of course, she still has a fundamentally youthful voice, but she doesn't really convincingly sound like a teenager or even a 20-something.
She has a certain vibe that is the only things I've ever heard. Like people I've ever heard sound like this are in something like Adventures in Odyssey, or if you were ever in like in your church or Christian school, like kind of like a school musical.
Yeah.
And like and there's the cast recording for that, and it's this kind of like I'm really earnest about everything and that kind of stuff, and hey, wait a second, blah blah blah. Like she's got this vibe.
Yeah.
I know what you're thinking, but I'm not in love with him. Like it's a very
like I just remember like the fucking Christian school that I went to, because of like the 8 I went to, the what I ended up graduating 8th grade from was I was literally in a class of like 8 people, and the school took place in a Baptist church basement, and so all of our school musicals were off of cassettes, and they were all from sometime in the late 70s, early 80s. And so they'd be like cultural references to things that like someone would say "sock it to me," and everyone would I'm like, and they're like, "That's a joke," and I'm like, okay, what does this mean?
Kiss my grits.
Yeah, I remember I was the lead in one of those plays where I played Gideon, doing a comedic retelling of the story of Gideon.
Nice.
And
which is a pretty funny story. Honestly.
Judges is the most comedic book of the Bible.
Yeah.
And I just remember like I had a retainer at the time, and so I was like, kind of had that kind of thing going. The guy who ended up being one of my best friends, who actually now, if you ever watch Jimmy Fallon, he's the science guy who comes on randomly. I was like, I just saw him on TV. Like at one point, I'm like, the fuck, Kevin? What are you doing on TV? And I hadn't talked to him in a while. But anyway, so his brother, as I'm up there singing a song about like how I'm not afraid of the Midianites or whatever, his brother, who's a shark scientist now, leaned over to him and goes, "The kid's gay as hell," which is really funny at the time.
And now he says that about sharks, I'm sure.
It's true. Yeah, he's just says homophobic shit about sharks all the time.
I have never seen a comedic show about Gideon, but I have seen a number of comedic shows starring Gideon Glick. That one was also just for me. We're going to move on to
Suspicious Minds.
Well, actually,
I'm Googling Gideon Glick real quick. Hold on.
It's related to Jiminy.
Personally, listening to this fucked me up a little bit again.
Yeah.
Because
it was a little hard, right? Of all of these episodes, and I have kind of a connection to the last couple a little bit too, but like this was the one that like legit did torment me.
Yeah.
As like there's a... Like, I was fairly, like, at the time, I definitely was, like, I'm such a dork loser and stuff. But looking back, I dated a lot in high school and was, fairly sexually active. Don't want to brag.
Wow, great going, Scott. You had sex. We're all really impressed.
In the 90s as a cool teen, but, like...
I'm intimidated.
It is one of those things where, like, the funny thing is I've occasionally, like, had this conversation with other people who grew up in this, where we talk about this sort of thing, and I mentioned, like, oh yeah, like, when I was a teen, I was fairly sexually active, which was, like, difficult, and, like, one time someone literally thought I was, like, braggy about it. I'm like, no, it was mortifying. This is a normal teen thing to do, and the only reason I think about it in a kind of a momentous manner, as opposed to this is just normal teen stuff, is because at the time it was freighted with this enormous import and this enormous sadness. It was like a tragedy, like
God's gonna punish
kind
me.
of thing.
I'm sinning against the law.
Without even punishing, it was more like, oh no, you have done something to this person and to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a desecration. Yeah,
so I couldn't enjoy it as a kid, which sucks because now I'm like, Like someone, like occasionally on Twitter, someone would be like, if you could pop back in and like tell your 15-year-old self something, I'd be like, there is no God, enjoy the sex, you're fine. Yeah.
And I think even outside of the sex thing too, like just in general, the idea of having like a fruitful, productive relationship with somebody who is not in the faith, you know,
right.
like.
And this makes it clear, it's any kind of relationship, right? It's not sexual, romantic, it's anything. You always are going to have to hold the unbeliever at arm's
There's
length.
a girl I dated briefly when I was like 20 or 19 or something, who was just amazing and super, super cool, but she was an atheist. And so like we were just head over heels, as you are, kind of especially at that age, just like dorky. This is the tail end of the mixtape era.
Oh, sure.
In 2001 or so. And so like we were doing that kind of stuff. And I was like trying to be, you know, like, hey, I'm kind of trying to slip the Christian stuff in there a little bit. And she was very much like, no, I get it, but no, I'm not into that at all whatsoever. I was raised Jewish and stuff. And it's like, cool. But, you know, in the Bible, Jews Christians are very similar. And she's like, no, just stop that. Like, I like you, but you've got to shut up. Basically.
That is really very similar to kind of how Connie is in this episode, right? Where she's like, well, he's not going to church now, but like maybe he'll want to come to church with me, you know?
Right. She's the only person I've ever dated that when I bumped into her later on like Facebook, I literally sent her a DM. I'm like, I am so sorry for what a fucking dork I was at that age. I am mortified still about all this. And she's like, oh no, it was fine. And I was like, no, it wasn't.
We now move on to Suspicious Minds, when the minds are sus. That's right, folks. Somebody is imposter. This is Among Us in real life.
I initially went into this thinking that it was actually the Paramount Plus sequel series to Criminal Minds that just fell through.
Suspicious Minds.
Yeah.
They just keep downgrading it. Shady Minds.
The fourth wit is going to be Mandy Patinkin, and it's going to be the Renaissance for Adventures in Odyssey.
So I included this one in the rotation just because it's much lighter than the other ones. I thought it was cute.
It's a nice little palate cleanser. It's also our introduction to Bernard Walton.
Right, and that's part of why I included it as well.
It
is a comparatively very charming episode compared to these other ones. Yeah.
Connie and Eugene need $100 each, because Connie is going to buy a car. Eugene is going to buy a computer.
That's how much these things cost in 1992.
Well, they only need $100 more. They don't need $100. They need $100 more.
They just need a few dollars more, like Clint Eastwood.
And Connie needs $100 for what she says is, and I quote, a brand new 1967 Ford, which is kind of a funny joke, especially because Eugene pokes fun at it.
Eugene really digs in on that.
Yeah, naturally,
So then some money ends up disappearing from the cash register. They start thinking someone has stolen it, and then they realize that exactly $100 has disappeared after 2 disappearances. And they're like, aha, it's the other one who has stolen it. In which case, Eugene decides to set a trap. At first, his first trap is just watching the register and then handcuffing anyone who comes near it, which then gets the handcuff around Bernard Walton, local. They call him a janitor, but he owns his own like maintenance and cleaning company.
Okay. This is the small business owner.
Would you mind if I locked you to the counter until Mr. Whitaker returns? He might want to ask you some questions before pressing charges.
Are you out of your mind? Press charges for what?
For petty theft, sir. $60 to be precise.
Oh, this is ridiculous. Are you accusing me of stealing money?
Eugene, what are you doing?
Oh, I'm glad you're here, Connie. Will you please... What is that all over your face? Most women do mud packs at night.
Just some grease paint.
You been out on maneuvers, or are you here to take hostages?
Well, I was watching him, Eugene. He wasn't doing anything.
Listen to her.
I could see him clearly from behind the artificial trees. He wasn't going for the cash register.
The cash register? If I was going to rob a cash register, do you think I'd come here? This place is getting lonelier all the time.
It would be helpful, sir, if you didn't add to the confusion.
Look, detective. I'm Bernard Walton. You know me, but both of you know me. I was trying to get some paper towels to clean the windows. I mean, you can't really suspect
I'm sorry, Mr. Walton. These are very difficult times. We must suspect everyone.
I see. I understand. But you're gonna suspect what an old squeegee tastes like if you don't get these handcuffs off me in the next 5 seconds.
So Bernard is a major recurring character. He's on the show until he passes away in somewhere around like 2014 or 2015. They've set him up. I don't think they did this on purpose, but it ends up becoming the main dynamic is between Bernard and Eugene. They're the Oscar and Felix of Adventures in Odyssey.
Right.
And
Interesting.
Bernard is played by Dave Madden, who in his day was well known for being on Laugh-In, the show that originated that phrase, "Sock it to me." He was also a recurring character on The Partridge Family and a regular on Alice. He was also a voice actor on The Curse of Monkey Island.
Oh.
Really?
Where he played Dingy Dog alongside another Adventures in Odyssey voice actor, Earl Boone, who played Regis Blackard in this show, who in Monkey Island was LeChuck.
No way!
He's LeChuck.
Oh my God.
Regis Blackard and LeChuck are the same voice actor? That's so cool.
This is blowing my mind, yeah.
Scott, you played Curse of Monkey Island, right?
Yeah, I did. And I know who the fucking Regis Blackard is. So I'm part of 10 people in the population who knows all of this.
This is our target audience.
This is the Venn diagram. Everyone that this is for is currently recording this episode.
Yeah, this is good.
Scott, I got some fan art I can send your way about with Blackard, by the way.
Oh no! I'm in a game that gets a lot of fan art. That's not something that I should be sent. So I immediately, when someone says fan art of like something like this, I'm like, oh God.
Hold on. I'll make it my background.
I have not found any sexual fan art from Adventures in Odyssey. I have found some fan fiction that is quite sexual.
Oh, there is Slash out there?
There is Slash. There's a lot of Blackard Maxwell and I think Blackard Glossman.
Yeah. That makes sense. That little clip that we just heard really is kind of indicative of the tone of the episode overall. It's funny, it's light, it moves very quickly, which in my mind, this is kind of... This is not necessarily the best example of an episode like this, but I do think it is a good example of what one of Odyssey's major strengths is, which is when it really leans into character-based interactions and humor. Wit, of course, comes in and makes it really annoying, but the dynamic between Connie, Eugene, and Bernard is actually pretty lived in, and it's reasonably funny. There's some funny lines in this episode.
They actually,
it's not a didactic episode.
Yeah, like that show could be actually, and I was actually laughed, not laugh, but I did like occasionally listening to this, largely just because of the interplay between them and the fact that occasionally like Eugene or someone will actually come out with something fairly like not ribald or whatever, but just like, oh no, this is a character who's not demonstrating pure Christianity.
Yeah, it's witty, right? It's got like an edge to it.
It's got a little back and forth to it. That comes up again also in the next couple episodes at one part where I'm
Bernard also has a great like one-liner with Connie because she's doing something else. Instead of wanting to trap someone, when she thinks that Eugene is doing it, she's just going to cover for him. She's like, he just needs the computer, whatever. And Bernard just tells her,
"Oh, Connie."
Yeah?
Well, for what it's worth, I think your heart's in the right place.
Really?
Yeah, your brain is missing in action, but your heart's in the right place. I don't know where these kids get their cockamamie ideas.
It's like a little relatively like more mean-spirited than you would expect.
That's also
a little bit funnier than you'd expect.
That's a very like CBS sitcom kind of line, right?
Right. Yeah. It is very much like I was surprised at how funny I found Eugene in this.
It's a wonderful Jigsaw origin story for Eugene.
Oh yeah,
he set bear traps.
He he electrocuted his parents to help them lose weight.
Full-blown Barney Fife.
Has Eugene converted yet at this point in the show?
No, Eugene does not convert until between the wits when Regis Blackard shows back up.
I kind of figured that's where we were headed, but
that's the one. That's the one where Eugene goes to hell, and we'll get there.
Eugene goes to hell in that one.
Well, Eugene goes to hell, and then Eugene does not convert again until like a few years later because Wit's still around when he goes to hell.
Can I ask just one question about hell in Odyssey? Is it like Dante's hell? Like, does he go to a specific circle, or it's just
far more troubling?
It's far scarier.
Honestly. It's one of the most horrifying images that they've managed to create.
It's a really, I think, good depiction of hell.
Yeah.
It's actually very, very disturbing, even as an adult.
Yeah, it's one of the less fun and interesting versions of hell, but you're still like, fuck, that does sound quite bad.
Yeah.
I would prefer not to go there, please.
I'm not into it. I also was impressed how much like Eugene, just sounds like knockoff John Hodgman.
yeah.
It is like really eerie.
Eugene's idea is he is going to rig up this electric device that's going to zap anybody who tries to open the register. Connie's just going to...
he's essentially just making a live connection between the cash register's metal surface and a car battery.
Right, mm-hmm. which is going to give you quite a jolt.
Oh, here's Eugene talking about setting up the machine, because he's done this specific device before.
Yeah.
I used to do this to my parents when they were dieting. It kept them away from the refrigerator.
You must have been a joy to have around as a child.
Thank you, sir.
Drag him.
And this is really the strength of Adventures in Odyssey, bringing on these really seasoned actors like Dave Madden.
And Will Ryan.
They can take a line that's not the funniest line in the world, but they can really make the delivery land.
Right.
And there's also that last scene, he's just like laughing throughout the entire dialogue, which is part of also the strength of the production style.
Yes.
Because Adventures in Odyssey, on the whole, tries to get as many scenes done with all of the actors in the room together as possible. So these big scenes that are Will Ryan and Dave Madden, they're in the room. They are actually playing off of each other, and you really do get that effect. That's why this plays at the best possible level that it can, given the caliber of the writing.
Yeah, and the dynamic of the actors is really the strength. It's not, the writing is there's a couple good jokes, but for the most part, it's decent. It really is the performances that elevate this material. Of course, it's not all fun and games. This episode would be so much better if Whit wasn't in it, but unfortunately, Whit has to show up to just be a total fucking oh, he's so annoying in this episode.
He's a buzzkill. Yeah.
He's a total buzzkill. He shows up and is rather than just watching the entertainment unfold, he tries to stop it all from happening because he's you're being too suspicious of each other. That's not good. And
it's the Chad Bernard Walton versus the Virgin John.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there's nothing that Whit said really that Bernard didn't get across better.
Right.
I feel which is just, you two are being fucking suspicious dumbasses. What is your problem?
But also playing it out, I would say that playing it out, watching it play out, letting it play out is the better approach. They will learn their lesson naturally. Whit didn't have to intercede here. It would have worked perfectly fine if they just let it happen.
Yeah, I actually thought that Whit was purposefully stealing money after the first bit to teach them a lesson. And then
that's the kind of shit
I knew that's where your brain was going to go, AJ.
No,
I knew that.
That's exactly what he would normally do.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's just the twist is that it's catching underneath the cash register and it's just taking out $20 or $60 a night.
But it's $67 and $23 in two separate nights.
But then let's just talk about. I do want to talk about that practically, very briefly. That doesn't make any sense. How is this place bringing in $100 a day? How is it only bringing in that little money?
The business is just dog shit. But again, it's getting all of its funding from the Pentagon black budget.
Right.
So that's why it doesn't really matter.
And so that's the big picture confusion, right? That doesn't make any sense. Obviously, this is going to be a cash business. These are kids. They're not going to be coming in with credit cards. But also the register itself. You know what you do with a register? Have you ever worked retail before? Do you know how you close a register? This would never happen. You take the drawer out.
Right? You take the drawer out and take it back to the cash office.
That's right, basically. Scott.
Yes. I was a grocery store employee for 5 years, so yeah.
I mean, Whit has one of those dodgy 1890s cash registers like Sam Drucker had in Green Acres.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that still has the same mechanism where you can take the drawer out.
Yeah.
Right. It's I also when it was here, let me take this out. It's catching, and that can again, retail experience here where I was that can happen, I guess, but it would be the first thing you think of.
Right.
If that, and also if you were taking the drawer out, it's impossible for it to get stuck, basically. But even if you're not taking the drawer out, that would be your first thought of let me just check behind here. Also because oftentimes you put things under the drawer. It's I got a special, there's a coupon here or a special something that I have to keep. Okay, yeah, just put that under the drawer and we'll grab that later. These people have not fucking worked retail. I'm just saying.
Yep.
They don't know shit about a cash register.
Or about teenage relationships is what we've learned.
Or about teenage relationships. They know all about fucking suspicion and car batteries.
Exactly.
And, torture.
They know how to hotwire a cash register.
I guess the only other thing that I want to ask about, and this is a question for AJ. because when we had seen Eugene earlier and we'd heard a little bit about his backstory,
Yes.
you know, we heard some potentially disturbing pieces of his upbringing. You know, his home, which always smelled like cleaning solution and so forth.
Yeah.
What does this do for you in terms of sort of your mental understanding of the character of Eugene Meltzner and, you know, who this kid was and what this kid is?
I think it's very important that Eugene be exposed to people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like I listened to this episode and I'm like, if Eugene were put into like a different group of individual or was like left to his own devices, like there would be murders. Like he would, people would be dead. The fact that he was going to set up a bear trap in the middle of a children's ice cream parlor,
right?
I think is enough for me to be like, you know, maybe he shouldn't be employed at a children's ice cream parlor,
right?
But you know, I feel like he is at least being kept in check while he's here. Him going to hell, I think, is a very valuable piece of information about me knowing Eugene as a character.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Because I think that he to see some sort of consequence for his actions might be beneficial, but I don't know. I think he's
but
very
you have to
funny.
understand also the cosmology of this world is that the consequences for his actions are simply the consequence of not believing in Jesus Christ.
It's not a specific
it's the
punishment.
dying in sin nature.
Right.
I see.
It's the dying in sin.
It's the Hamlet argument.
It's like Hamlet, exactly. All the sins were on his head. Just to kind of close it up, I just want to say one last quick thing, which is, you know, this episode then ends, and I just wanted to talk for a second about Chris's closing thing here, where she's like, you know, Whit is so wise. And it's because of his wisdom that he was willing to tell them that they need to think the best of each other, because that's what you need to do sometimes. Bye.
Sometimes I think that Chris is Helga Pataki and just has like a bust of Whit's head just made up of chewing gum behind her, and as she says these things, like she's staring into the eyes of like a composite shot of like Whit like leaving like Whit's End and giving her a little wink. Like Absolutely. It really, it feels like she's full blown cult member.
It's that one, or it's at the to actually leading us into the next thing, I guess, after the break is it's that's how she refers to fucking James Dobson at the beginning of that thing. Yes. She is just beaming with pride at James, Dr. James Dobson.
That's a very good Chris impression. That's like exactly her.
Whit and James Dobson are so incredibly wise, which is why when they tell you to take ivermectin to treat your COVID, you listen, goddammit.
Well, when we come back,
like doctors lie sometimes.
Speaking of lies, here's some commercials for you.
All right. Tired of the same old wholesome entertainment? Are your days full of baseball games and Bible bowls? Are interlopers forcing you into strange immersive simulations of biblical events and notable moments in American history, causing you to question your own grasp on the very boundaries of reality? If so, it's high time to make your own rules, control your destiny, and know the real power. Welcome to the world of Castles and Cauldrons. Hack, slash, and cast spells as you make your way into a world of imagination and discovery. Raise a cursed entity from the dead while you astral project yourself into a bird. Mutilate your sister's vintage doll and do sex things to it. It's all real, it's all here, and it's all more extraordinary than you could ever imagine. Start your quest today with the Castles and Cauldrons base pack, which comes with everything you need to acquire the power. Or, for an extra $9.99, upgrade to the Deluxe Edition to access real power even sooner. Castles and Cauldrons, an immersive role-playing experience that will consume your life. Castles and Cauldrons base pack contains 2 plastic swords and absolutely nothing else. Deluxe Edition also includes a single 20-sided die. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. In the event that Shulman comes back from the dead for more than 8 hours at a time, contact your local castle keeper immediately.
Because I also just, looked up loads of shit beforehand. I just fell down a rabbit hole of, looking...
It's wild, isn't it?
At the Adventures in Odyssey wiki.
That wiki is disturbingly well made.
Yeah, that is I was like, who's doing this? Is this James Dobson? Or
there's a whole network of fans. Their message boards aren't around anymore. There seems to be some kind of dust up that happened a couple years back.
Oh, was there drama in the community?
I can't quite find it though, but there's like stuff around the wiki that is documented a little bit in the AIO Wiki podcast.
I want to find all of the remnants of the online Adventures in Odyssey community and post our shit on there just to piss them off. I think it would be funny.
Because I assume many of them are still fairly devout, right?
Oh, very much so.
Who treat this with a degree of reverence.
If you go,
one of the other Adventures in Odyssey podcasts, which is the guy that used to do the AIO Wiki podcast, but that has dissolved for some nebulous reason.
Well, God, what a thankless job. The AIO Wiki podcast.
Well, he's like a 19-year-old kid who goes to Liberty University.
Oh, wow. No, he's not going to be a Christian at some point in the fairly near future.
It's like, just give it 3 or 4 more years.
I mean, if he is, he's definitely not going to be that kind of Christian.
Either Liberty University guy is going to be on a podcast in the future laughing about how he did this, or he is going to become a terrifying nightmare person.
Right.
Those are the only ways out.
When we're still doing this in 10 years, he'll come on this podcast.
Yeah, speaking of terrible person, we get to my favorite part of this two-parter, Castles and Cauldrons. Oh, thunder, crows.
Sorry, I'm feeling very oppressed right now. Just there's a spirit of darkness encroaching.
I just dropped a glass.
Some fucking like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like I just felt
it really was. Oh God, we are going to get there, but good Lord, this episode.
So my favorite part of this two-parter was always James Dobson showing up.
Yeah.
Because Odyssey holds him at arm's length where they can.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Because again, Odyssey is about creating a good show, and that's supposed to draw people in, right? It's like Power Team. Power Team's whole thing is not God lets me blow up this hot water bottle or rip this phone book in half. It's like you came to see this show, and then you're gonna get the gospel.
Right.
My dad lived on the same floor at ORU as John Jacobs, the founder of Power Team, by the way.
God, that's a fucking curse sentence.
Stop bragging, Brian.
Like,
God.
oh yeah, wait, I just can't believe the fucking name dropping here. Like,
it's a big old
Power Team, Oral Roberts University.
Ever heard of it?
Yeah, so maybe you've heard of.
Let me tell you about the times I met Rich DeVos.
I already did this. I realized with the Josh Harris churches. I was like, I went to the church family of churches that he was a pastor in.
You think that having met Rich DeVos is something, Brian? When I was back at my grandma and grandpa's place not too long ago, I came across a copy of Rich DeVos's book dedicated to my grandpa and signed by Rich himself.
Wow. He handed me a copy. He handed everyone in my class a copy for our 8th grade graduation. That book, Hope from My Heart.
Yeah, he gave it to everybody. But was your copy specifically dedicated, like in a personal way?
No, it was
to
just a
you
generic
specifically?
signed copy. Yeah,
this is such like a fucking cursed ecosystem.
I'm in it, dude.
It's bad stuff. Bad news.
It's like, oh yeah, Rich DeVos, and I'm like, I totally fucking forgot who that is. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, of course. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Not good.
It's exactly who I was picturing.
In high school, there was a special chapel that was just him talking to us about his book, and then he gave us copies of his book at the end of that chapel. This is the same chapel that was located.
This guy sucks
directly.
So fucking much.
No, I'm not done yet. This is the same chapel, like our amphitheater, not amphitheater, our theater, right? Our theater was located in this. There was a big lobby outside of it that had a car in the lobby there, and this is an old car that Rich DeVos and Jay Van Andel actually used when they were getting Amway up and running back in the fucking, whenever, back in the day.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So let's talk to our good friend Dr. James Dobson, who has a lot of very wise words for us going into this episode.
Chris here again. Because of the subject matter in today's program, we thought it would be helpful to hear a few words from the founder and president Focus on the Family, Dr. James Dobson. Doctor?
Let's go!
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Kids, I want to take a moment to talk to you and your parents about today's episode of Adventures in Odyssey. I'm sure that many of you have heard about the so-called fantasy role-playing games
that
are available in the stores these days. You may have even seen one of them at a friend's house.
Just say Dungeons and Dragons.
Maybe you've heard your brothers or sisters talk.
He sounds kind of like John Goodman in Righteous Gemstones.
But they generally have this one thing in common.
Picture like a giant,
they are fantasy games that require the players to become characters who use swords and bows and arrows and other weapons to battle their enemies. Now, on the one hand, these games seem harmless enough. There's certainly nothing wrong with using your imagination.
Of course not.
And if that's all these games involved, maybe I wouldn't be so concerned. But the fact is, in order to play these games properly, you usually have to use magic and mysticism. Things that are clearly not Christian.
On the one hand, the problems are bad. On the other hand, the solutions.
Now say that their
imagination, I
led
sleep.
them into contact
Sorcery and
with
magic,
demons
real shit.
and even Satan worship. Now,
What?
I've spent some time on our Focus on the Family broadcast talking to your parents out there about fantasy role-playing
Yeah,
games.
he's just been ranting.
I think you younger listeners also need to be warned about how dangerous these games can be. That's why we've created this special 2-part Adventures in Odyssey
it's special.
that you're about to hear.
It's a very special
It's
episode.
not that we want to scare anybody. We just believe that drama is a good way to
We
let
don't want
you
to
know
scare
about
you.
it.
We just want to scare
See,
the
one of
shit
these
out of you.
days, somebody, maybe it'll be one of your best friends,
My best
might
friend.
ask you to play one of these games.
Fuck no.
And when that happens, I hope you'll think back to this special adventure and know the right thing to say.
Thank you, Doctor.
No, I won't
So
play Adventures
parents,
in Odyssey.
please stay
I won't
with
play
your
Dungeons and
kids for this
Dragons.
program.
The radio
There are a
drama
few
that
things
Focus
they
on the
might
Family
need you to
produces told me
explain
not
at the
to.
end of the broadcast. Well, are you ready?
I sure
I was
am.
born ready, James.
Yeah. He's like, hey,
So
kids, you ever
good.
heard of the West Memphis 3?
So, I'm not going to get into the West Memphis 3 in particular, but I do want to give a little rundown on the history of the panic around
Please do.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Please do.
Because this also connects with our first episode, which was about the moral panic around Night Trap.
Yeah.
So in the 1960s, there were a bunch of dorks in the Midwest who were getting around playing war games. People like Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, Dave Wesley, Jeff Perrin, Tim Kask, and they were part of this like new young. It wasn't just a bunch of old guys playing their classic war games. It was like a bunch of guys who were like, "How do we make this better? How do we make this more interesting to us young dorks?"
They were cool. They were cool dorks.
Cool dorks.
Yeah.
Cool dorks. So they came up with systems that were more individualized, right? You'd control a single character in a band of people rather than just simply a unit that you push across a map. They were creating more elaborate mythologies that were like mostly Lord of the Rings. And Dungeons and Dragons, the final version, came out in 1974. And of course, all of this was being developed by people who were meeting up and playing games at Gen Con, which they founded in 1968. This led to a lot of other tabletop games like Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, which was actually after this episode that came out in 91, GURPS, Shadowrun, Cyberpunk 2020, licensed games for Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, etc.
The Adventures in Odyssey tabletop.
Right. The Adventures in Odyssey immersive sim set in Wits End that I am going to develop that has the computer that runs applesauce as Shodan.
So then let's move ahead to 1979. There's a young man named James Dallas Egbert III. Heretofore, we'll just call him Dallas Egbert. And Dallas was a student at MSU. He's very young. He got into school at either 15 or 16.
MSU being Michigan State University?
Michigan State University. So he was young. He was like in the computer club and things like that. He was a nerd and was clearly having some troubles. He was getting into drugs. He was drinking a lot. And in August of 1979, in his room, he writes a suicide note and he disappears. He goes down into the steam tunnels at the school and throws a bunch of Quaaludes in his mouth and does not die.
Oh.
He ends up leaving the steam tunnels after his failed suicide attempt, and he goes to a friend's house. But like only that friend that he's with really even knows where he is. His parents don't know. The roommate who discovered the note is really worried, calls the parents. The parents end up calling a private investigator, William Deere. There's already some press that's going around too, like the university newspaper is writing about some guy who disappeared, and Deere decides to bring his own press with him because he figures out that this kid has gone down to the steam tunnels through talking to people, and he says that he determines, due to some tacks that were arranged a certain way on a cork board, that it was a map of the steam tunnels. I don't know if that's really anything at all, but Well, and I mean, I remember from my experience going to a school that had steam tunnels, everyone loved to try to get into those fucking things.
At Calvin, you mean?
Yeah, Calvin. Everyone crawled around those things.
Yeah, when I was, this is neither here nor there, but in the college, I worked for the college IT department moving computers around, and sometimes we would use the tunnels as shortcuts. But that was if we could get access to them, which was not always.
Right.
Are these like tunnels you can stand up in, or are they like more like army crawl kind of tunnels?
No, they're like you can't like stand up. It depends. Generally speaking, you can
a little hunched over.
You're a little hunched over. Yeah.
Okay.
This is not
high school also
this is not
had
uncommon
this.
in Michigan.
Yeah, the school I went to was an old Indian boarding school, and they sort of spread the campus out and had central boiling, so there were tunnels that led to every building on that campus. Not at all fucking weird.
This is the most normal thing ever.
Right.
This is extremely normal. Everything that's about to happen is incredibly normal.
This is the most normal shit. I don't even know why any of this is worthy of remark.
Yeah, why would it be?
So the day after his failed suicide attempt, maybe goes to Gen Con, actually.
Oh.
There are a couple people who reported possibly seeing him there. He did have friends that he played tabletop games with, but he's mostly just gone. No one knows where he's living except for the friend that he's living with. And all of this stuff starts sort of bubbling up in the media. I think Deer starts making some inadvisable comments to the media figures that he took down in the tunnels with him to find Dallas Egbert.
Yikes.
Of course, not finding anyone.
That's how you know it's a good private investigator guy.
Right.
He just takes the media with him and be like, hey, you want to see a dead body?
He's brought his own curtain to hang up and like reveal.
In some way, I can understand the strategy of getting the media involved because that does become important for Dallas himself to actually reach out later. But the story starts going that this kid was just obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons, this tabletop RPG that mysterious teens love to play, and that he made a map of the steam tunnel system, and they were, using that, treating that as though it was the dungeon or whatever, as opposed to like college kids love to go down to the steam tunnels, and this kid was just already suicidal.
Right.
And so he ends up leaving Michigan. He gets on a bus. He goes down to Louisiana for a while. And then after a little bit, he about a month passes. He calls up Deer and tells him where he is. Deer comes down. They talk. He ends up getting brought back to, it sounds like his uncle. And that's kind of the story. He doesn't die, and he certainly doesn't die in the tunnels, but that starts to be what gets circulated around. And throughout the 80s, there starts being this like urban legend about a kid at your college who went down in the tunnels and killed himself because he was playing Dungeons and Dragons. This becomes like a widespread thing. Like I'm sure if you talk to someone who went to Calvin in the early 80s, they probably had some story.
I should
like
ask
that.
my dad about it. I bet he like heard that when ironically it was actually happening across the state and he didn't kill himself.
A totally different school, and it's not really what happened. Dallas does end up killing himself almost a year to the day after his attempt in the tunnels. But he does so at home. He does so successfully with a gun.
Ugh.
And this also starts to become a recurring theme. Then everything just gets even more muddled, and it's like he did kill himself, he did go into the tunnels, so then it just mashes into one single story. The press has been kind of going nuts with this. Every little newspaper around the country is picking up this little story about someone who has been driven mad by a game of pretend that has ended his life, and sometimes the story doesn't go with this. Someone killed himself in the tunnel. He just got into the tunnels because he was all mixed up, and then he just died down there.
He thought he was in a dungeon.
Well, and then also as the story gets weirder and weirder, then also versions of this story have it being that there was some sort of like a satanic ritual going on in the tunnels.
Right. So in 1981, we get two books that come out. John Coyne wrote Hobgoblin, which is about a kid who's playing a tabletop role-playing game, and he starts mixing up fantasy with reality. But the really influential one is Rona Jaffe's Mazes and Monsters, which she said she wrote in a matter of days because she didn't want someone else to scoop the idea. And this is drawing directly from Dallas Egbert's story, as she only partially knows it. So it's about a kid who gets completely consumed by a game. He's in college. He disappears into the tunnels. They play the game in the tunnels, which just seems inconvenient.
Well, and situations like this are so interesting too, right? Because this is something that often happens, where something occurs and then a fictitious narrative is created off of the back of this, and eventually in the popular imagination, the fictitious narrative replaces what really happened. Like one more recent example of this that I always think about is, and this is a slightly different example, but when Sarah Palin, everybody thinks that Sarah Palin said, "I can see Russia from my house." She never said that. Right. She never said anything close to that. She said that, she's in Alaska.
You can actually see Russia from land here in Alaska,
which is, I think true
quote.
If it's a clear day and you're at the
sort of
very
true. Yeah,
end
it
of the
doesn't
very
really
strait.
matter in terms of like international relations,
it's dumb,
but it's a true thing.
But on SNL, Tina Fey, as Sarah Palin, said, "I can see Russia from my house," and so now everybody thinks that Sarah Palin said that. This is no different. Yeah. But the consequences of this and everything else, of course, lead to this big ol' satanic panic.
Yeah. So Sarah Palin, much like Dallas Egbert, is really a victim here, and
that is what we're saying. Yes,
that was my point.
Mazes and Monsters is a big hit. And it gets turned into like a TV movie of the week, which was a big thing at that time.
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah. So in 1982, less than a year after the publication of this book, the TV movie Mazes and Monsters comes out. It stars Tom Hanks in his first starring role.
Yeah. What?
It's fucking dog shit.
It's
I think you can find it on YouTube still.
Small Tom Hanks, yeah.
Yeah, and he's really
so
bad.
Small.
It's actually
like 4
it's very
inches tall.
edifying to see someone like Tom Hanks just do a very bad job in a movie. But
but then he got big.
There it is.
Oh,
fantastic.
Oh. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a Tom Hanks joke, and Turner and Hooch. I don't know.
Just cast him away. Just cast him away.
There you go.
The Lady Killers.
Saving Private
remake.
Ryan.
Yeah.
He's had quite a career. Sully. He's had quite a career, just as far as like
it's
the
like
diversity
a vast
of roles.
Would you say
vast atlas, maybe a cloud atlas?
Would you say that Mazes and Monsters sullied his career?
Oh my God.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I wouldn't, but I would say it would be better if it was set in Philadelphia.
Shut up. Okay.
So Mazes and Monsters, the TV movie of the week, is also like a sensation. It gets re-aired a number of times. Also in 1982, a teenager named Irving Pulling commits suicide. His mother, Patricia Pulling, then files a wrongful death suit against Irving's principal, claiming that the principal put a Dungeons and Dragons curse on her son, which caused him to kill himself.
Oh, one of those.
Yes. Yeah. Irving shot himself in the chest with a gun. So she started a group, and if you listen to the Night Trap episode, you'll hear us mention them there too, called BAD.
Oh, yeah.
Which is called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, which is a name that's so bad you'd think Marge Simpson came up with it.
That sounds like a podcast.
Yeah.
Welcome to Bad, Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. I'm your dungeon master.
It's like people who are
Steve the Dungeon Master.
People who uphold the original vision of Gary Gygax and are really upset with the way that Dungeons and Dragons is panning out as of late.
You really need to keep the orcs. You really need to keep the subtext around the orcs. Otherwise, it's not pure anymore. Ugh. So Bad describes Dungeons and Dragons as a game that uses, and I'm shortening this list. This is a full quote with nothing in between. This is just a long block list that was in her literature. Because again, Bad was really just her. It's not an organization, it's one lady. And a lot of these pressure groups at the time are really just like a person.
Right.
So Bad says that Dungeons and Dragons uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, sex perversion, homosexuality, gambling, desecration, and other practices. Again, the real list is about 3 or 4
Not
times.
Not other practices.
I hate those other practices.
So she ends up getting a private investigator's license.
Sweet.
In order to become a law enforcement consultant.
Wow.
God.
Wow.
It all comes back to cops.
It's always the fucking cops.
Wow.
And what happens is when you look at all of these other stories, the big, there's like a Boulder murder-suicide or double suicide. There is a story about 2 like 20-year-olds who tied up a friend and accidentally killed her. All these things that start getting linked to Dungeons and Dragons. There's also a guy who accidentally killed a friend with a shotgun when he was 16 years old. And the story is always like the police are like, well, Dungeons and Dragons had something to do with it.
Right.
And then when you actually get into the story, it has nothing to do with anything. Maybe Dungeons and Dragons wasn't even something that the kid played.
Right.
Usually it's more about like kids who are in desperate situations, poverty, and also have access to a gun that is, unsupervised access to guns and irresponsible
the Jay's
behavior.
Journal thing. Do you know Jay's Journal?
Right.
I'm not familiar.
Let's talk about that.
It was in the 70s. There was an author, I forget her name. She wrote a book called Go Ask Alice. And this was a kind of teen panic book. I forget she was like a psych or like a therapist or a counselor or something. And so she started writing these books. She wrote this book, Go Ask Alice, which is supposedly about this, wholesome teenage girl who gets involved with the drugs and the big city, etc.
The
and
jazz.
just, goes down, jazz, sitting in parlors. But the
old honky tonk.
For cigarettes.
Ringing up her friends saying ahoy hoy.
The playing billiards. So
the entertainer plays on a piano roll. Sorry,
riding two-wheeled bicycles.
Yeah.
Not going side saddle on a horse.
Just horrifying stuff. But so she gets into that and leads her down the path to ruin. I don't know if she dies. She might die at the end of it, but this became a big hit and she passed it off as, no, this is real. This is a real thing.
I remember it being written by Anonymous.
It says
on the
very
time.
Clearly not real. Very, very. But at the time, people ate it up, and
it says it's real right there on the cover.
She followed it up with this book called Jay's Journal, and it was this parents of this kid who tragically killed himself, and they thought that Go Ask Alice was real, and so they brought his diaries to this author and said, oh, your book is helping all these kids who are also in dire straits to stay out of the drugs and the go-go 60s lifestyle. And so so can you take our son's journals and maybe make something good out of this so that other families don't have to get into this, which just fuck this lady regardless, because it's just if you're setting yourself up on that grift of when people are coming to you going hi, here's the most precious, horrible, hurtful things.
Yeah.
Can you please, you're someone that we believe can make something good out of this.
Yeah.
And so here's what she did.
And she just goes, fine, I'll take it.
She took some of his journal stuff, but also made it so that he got into Satan and cattle mutilation. Of course. And there was a demon or a spirit guide or a demon named Raoul who showed up.
Raoul Esparza?
Drove him to, drove him to suicide. And the family was just absolutely horrified, obviously, out of it. And it's just this absolute monster of a woman. It's this general thing also just with obviously the rest of the satanic panic happening at the time.
Yeah, there's also the book that comes out about the little girl who was the supposed victim of satanic ritual abuse. Of course,
and then
most
you had
of this was fabricated by the author.
Because it's still going, obviously. This is a huge element of QAnon.
Yeah, Pizzagate. It is satanic panic.
Yeah, you also just see this online just popping up in general. And so much of it was just reaction to post-60s. There are more women outside of the house working, and so who's watching the kids? And then there is just a lot more gay men in particular, but queer people in general out. And then people not going to church in the 60s. And then they're all into new agey weird stuff and freak out drugs. And then there was a bunch of serial killers in the 70s. And all this together with it was just kind of this reactionary backlash that's still going, and they just picked a zillion things, one of which happened to be this dork-ass game, Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, and that's the thing is Dallas Egbert was himself probably gay. That information came out in Deer's own books, so which I kind of distrusted a little bit. But he did write that in '84 after all of this stuff because he was trying to actually talk down the Dungeons and Dragons stuff that he played up when he was still actively in the investigation.
Yeah.
So there's also the kid in Boulder who kills himself. The police were like, oh yeah, it's probably something to do with Dungeons and Dragons, which was a game he played a couple times.
Sure. Yeah.
And he actually killed himself because he had stolen a car and driven it to Kansas and was about to get his sentencing for that, where they were going to force him to go back to school because he had dropped out of school.
Well, it's also,
why he killed himself. And the kid with the shotgun who shot another friend, that was a coerced confession where the police basically just wrote up the whole thing, said that Dungeons and Dragons made him do it, and that's what he signed
This is just a lot easier than dealing with any actual problems.
Yes.
Right.
And you also have to see the pipeline of information. You have the ecosystem of police officer instruction is something that doesn't get talked about enough. And throughout the 80s, there are instructional videos being released by detectives and by pastors and people like the founder of BADD, who got this PI license just so she could be a consultant for police departments all around the country, so they could presuppose any crime committed by a teenager. And again, most of these things would not happen if those kids if their parents were able to lock up the gun that they had.
Right.
They're able to say, no, it's the tabletop role-playing game that turned them Satanist and also gay.
Yeah.
So she teams up with this man, Thomas Radecki, and they found the National Coalition on TV Violence. I talked about the National Coalition in the Night Trap episode as well.
And that was
Thomas
I
Radecki
didn't realize that the same person was behind these two things.
Yes. So Radecki is a psychiatrist, and Scott, you may have heard this name a little bit more recently in local news. We'll get to that in a minute. Over time, Patricia Pulling writes a totally unhinged but still not really out of fashion for that era book about D&D. So she has her own book. This book gets completely discredited. Her organization is basically nothing by the 90s. She dies of lung cancer in 97, and that organization is gone. Radecki loses his license in 1992 for immoral conduct with a patient. Radecki also was working with Tipper Gore on the Parents Music Resource Center at the same time. Again, this was like the only thing that a certain segment of America was paying any attention to whatsoever was just like how much swearing and whatever was going on in the entertainment that their children had.
This was such a core element of my entire childhood. Was this paranoia, this very demoniac world was
Did all of you have the box that would censor live TV? Like you would read the closed captioning.
I did.
And it would bleep.
It would take the swear words out of the TV show.
That is fancy.
It would mute the people talking, and then it would put up a little closed captioning.
You'd get the video and audio out into the box, and then you'd put it back into the TV. And so whenever a swear word came up on the closed captioning, it would mute the TV for that block, and then it would have some sort of replacement word in the closed captioning for that swear.
Yeah.
Very funny stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. You get some hilarious... For whatever reason, they decided to censor the word Woody in closed captioning. So when you watch Toy Story, he was always just listed as Notion.
That's exactly the one I was going to bring up, because we would watch Toy Story at my friend's house, and it would be like, who's Notion?
Notion and Buzz.
That famous Pixar character, Notion the Cowboy.
Notion the Cowboy, a Tom Hanks performance.
Hey!
Notion the Cowboy sounds like a character from an anime. Like
it does. I was going to say, this sounds very anime suddenly.
So when he loses his license, Thomas Radecki hands control of the National Coalition to a woman named Carol Lieberman, who I talked about at length in the Night Trap episode, who is, among other things, famous for basically being the first architect of a gay panic defense in American jurisprudence.
That's right.
She sucks.
These are just the worst people. This is just a gallery.
Worst.
Thomas Radecki gets his license back in 2002, and then he starts to run an opioid addiction treatment center in Clarion County, Pennsylvania. He's a good person. He did good things. Look at this. By 2012, he had amassed about 1,000 patients, which is totally normal. Don't think about it. It's normal. And then apparently he was a fan of using alternative addiction treatments, and now
I have the weirdest
treating
feeling
opioid addiction
about where this is going, Brian.
Treating opioid addiction is really, really hard. I mean, addiction in general is just like your failure rate is always going to be higher than your success rate.
Right.
Yeah.
But he starts championing other medications to give people. And according to the case file, he was getting people addicted to those drugs and getting them dependent on him specifically.
Yes, sir.
And so then he's just a nice guy, though. So he opens up his house to his patients. And he says it's a sort of communal living. You know, we all like that. We all love communes.
I have heard of this, I'm realizing, as you were going through this. I just looked it up and I was like, fuck, yeah, I know exactly where this goes.
So he starts trading these drugs out. He gives people free drugs in exchange for sex.
Sweet.
So he has sex with hundreds of women that are in his care. Even fathering a child with one of them.
Fuck.
And he kind of had this looping system. He had another house across the street, so people would live with him, and then he'd start dating someone else, so he'd have her live across the street, and then he'd throw the old person out and bring that person into his house. So he's in prison. He was sentenced in 2016, and he's probably never going to see the outside of a jail cell ever again.
These are just the worst people.
Yeah.
Like, they're a specifically kind of American kind of bad people, too.
This is the caliber of human being that was leading the charge against Dungeons and Dragons, all for the sake of getting book deals, developing fame, growing influence, and pushing deranged evangelical agendas.
Yeah, it's like it was most of it's like a hustle. It was like I remember like during like the January 6th thing where it's like, how many of these people who are like doing this are like currently live streaming for like their Instagram or whatever, where they're hawking supplements.
And
like,
many of them
full
were
names, their address, their business.
Right.
Yeah.
That's many of them were, and ironically, of course, that's what ended up allowing the feds to nail them. Like they're continually getting brought in.
And so, of course, Mazes and Monsters is kind of the first one, but then we get a whole ecosystem of anti-Dungeons and Dragons material. Right. The most famous piece is probably Jack Chick's comic tract called Dark Dungeons.
Great comic.
Which is actually kind of low tier Jack Chick, if I'm being perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
It's one of his least unhinged tracks.
Absolutely.
Considering the subject,
there's nothing about how the Pope is coming over with it. They get way,
I think I'm coming
weirder.
around to Jack Chick's side on the whole Pope.
Well, to be clear, as a Catholic, the Pope does have an army, and we are coming. So
that's true. Well, like, who are the people who are like, it's the Swiss guards? Who are the people in the Vatican that are the
Swiss guards? The Swiss Army. Yeah, the Swiss Army. They have knives.
The Swiss Guard. They're not the Swiss Army. It's the Swiss Guard somehow.
Okay.
No one knows how Switzerland works. Least of all the Swiss.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how it is. They
their
speak
plays
French
are so weird.
Which is not what I would have expected.
Yeah. At the same time, we have the Satanic Panic, which is in full bloom throughout the 80s. Like this is the reaction not to the freewheeling 60s anymore, but to the freewheeling tabletop role-playing 1980s. We have an army of dorks that are here to corrupt the youth of America. Satanic Panic is fully mainstream. Oprah does an episode about it.
Right.
And she doesn't do an episode on the panic. She does an episode about how satanic cults are real and they're strong and they're my friend.
Right.
Geraldo Rivera does a big episode, a full hour just on how Satanism is real and thriving in all of the dark corners of America. People talk about how insane QAnon is, and it is, but you don't actually have mainstream TV personalities like fucking Oprah devoting an entire episode to how QAnon is actually happening right now.
And a lot of QAnon beliefs, it's like obviously more of like a modern like Omni conspiracy, but like most of that shit is stuff that like you heard.
Yeah, it's warmed over.
Like it is very just refreshed, rebranded with some of the quieter parts said loud. That's about it.
Yeah.
Like
it is really fried beans of conspiracy
you'd
theories.
Hear about like which entertainments around were satanic. And this stuff bled into the 90s, so I experienced it as a kid. It was not so much of the active panic going on, but being like, yeah, you can't watch the Smurfs.
Yeah.
Because those are actually the spirits of the dead, rather than... What they actually are is far worse, which is Belgian. And
so every episode, we lose another European market, Brian.
Right, I've gone after the Finnish, now I go after the Belgians. It's okay. And then... James Dobson on his radio show is just railing against this day after day after day after day.
That was like literally all we heard about for a very long time, basically.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, Odyssey can kind of do its own thing a lot of the time, but James Dobson can sort of choose to get involved whenever he wants. That's why he gets rid of the bumbling cop character, because it's unfriendly to the cops.
He's an interventionist god. He just pops in occasionally to slightly direct history.
Then he decides, like, we're gonna do a Dungeons and Dragons episode. We're going to make it a two-parter. This has to be, we're doing the very special episode. We're doing the movie of the week. We are going to make this thing. We are going to put the literal fear of God into these children. So take it away, Josh.
Yeah, well, so the other thing I'm kind of wondering about real quick before we do that, Scott, like what is your background with Dungeons and Dragons, with RPGs, with anything like that? Do you have one?
No, because I never got into playing tabletop because, like, at the age I would have been into that was height of this. Like, it was sold to me as like the kind of ultimate evil. Like, it is really comedic to talk about it now because, everyone's like, that's like a weird, funny thing happened. And it was like, it like subsumed everything. It was like all of media was like, if you ever watched like Hell's Bells, which is like the classic, like you go track down on YouTube Hell's Bells if you have a couple hours and just enjoy, because it is this, but about all pop culture, but particularly music. And it was how, you know, Aleister Crowley was behind it all and stuff. And it was this, but for music, just for music in general, but pop culture too. So it was like, everything was a source of kind of like paranoia.
Did you ever like burn your CDs or do anything like that? Like the whole, by burn, I mean physically burn, not like burn a CD.
No,
it's the mixtape era.
Yeah, I never did that because I was like, I bought it, but like into it, but not in the sense of like, I don't know, like I had like Dragon Warrior, like the NES RPG that you got with a subscription to Nintendo Power, which like at the time was like a really good deal because like, you know, we didn't have.
You got it with a subscription?
Yeah, that was how everyone at that age had got into playing in console JRPGs, was because Nintendo Power gave it away with the subscription. It's the only way I got it because we weren't buying a lot of video games, and so. And so like my parents ended up taking that away.
Oh, interesting.
And like it threw out my like Nintendo Power because it had like magic symbols and demons and stuff in it. And so I wasn't exposed to it as much. And by the time, this is really funny, by the time like I got into high school, like there were kind of like a couple different paths you could take as a kind of like a dorky kid who didn't like really like fit in. And like of those paths, I got into like the punk scene as opposed to the D&D scene, which were like two separate things. Legitimately, the people in my school who were actually into that were all like the people, like the classic nerds, like in the sense of like, we get good grades. I literally was not astute enough academically, I don't think, to hang out with them. So I just started going to punk shows instead and got involved in bands. And honestly, in hindsight, I lucked out. I flipped that coin, that fateful coin flip when I was like 15. When I was around Chris's age, or Connie's age, I don't know how old Chris is, but
she's ageless.
Chris is ageless. Chris will never die. Chris was never born.
Yeah, I zigged instead of zagged, and as such, didn't get into tape. It was straight console RPGs for me.
So then let's get into the episode. After that great introduction by Dr. Dobson,
blessings be upon his name.
Blessings be upon his name.
Can I just say briefly that this is not an intro where Chris necessarily comes in. I think Whit opens this episode by building an invention that flushes, and he's like, I just gotta figure out what this
invents
does.
The toilet.
He invents the toilet. But my dream is that one day that invention that Whit is working on explodes and kills him.
With any luck, it will.
I always have my fingers crossed.
We basically open up here with Jimmy Barkley, you know, and you remember the Barkleys. They're our all-American family. Jimmy's the son. And, hey, relatives are coming to visit. We got Len, the cousin, who's voiced by the same guy, by the way, who voices Richard Maxwell.
They let Maxwell out of prison.
And
they do actually let Maxwell out of prison, but that's a different episode.
And Len is, and you know, Len has brought some games with him in his bag. And guess what? These games are so much better than Zapazoids.
And the reason for children, I've been told.
And the reason that it's so much better than Zapazoids is that it's like real, you know? And Len shows Jimmy the game, and then they get into the character building process.
Have you ever heard of Castles and Cauldrons?
Gotta go fast.
Sounds familiar.
Here, look at this book. It tells you about it.
Castles and Cauldrons, a role-playing fantasy game.
My friends and I play all the time. See, you become a character, and once you prove yourself worthy, you get certain powers.
Powers?
Yeah, you'll see.
So what's all this other junk?
Our equipment to play. Swords and belts and other things we'll need.
It's like immediately
end of list.
Immediately very shifty. And he like won't tell the parents that he has toys to play a game, which they wouldn't be suspicious about at all.
And the character creation is a bit different from what normally happens in character creation, where like you name your character and you build stats.
A few things are a little bit different.
You have no choice. There's no choice in this version.
This diverges slightly from a more traditional understanding of Dungeons & Dragons.
No, this is an RPG.
This is closer to I think how Cyberpunk 2020 works.
Right.
If I've read correctly.
Right. This is an RPG in which the dungeon master, which in this case is Len, tells you your name, tells you what you're going to be doing, and tells you literally everything else, and forces you.
It's like you're joining Synanon, and he's like, okay, we're going to shave your head. We're going to give you a new name. Your child doesn't belong to you anymore.
Yeah.
And go build San Bernardino.
He becomes that notorious D&D class, the Apprentice.
Right. Yeah. And then they go down to the forest, and they start whacking around with plastic swords in hand. You know, they're LARPing. And
they're
because it's
again,
also
the LARPing doesn't even have rules.
Also LARPing?
Yes.
And this follows the whole trend. Like this is, if you watch Mazes and Monsters, that's what they're doing. They're just going around waving their arms around in a steam tunnel. And not sitting around a table with a whole bunch of paper and dice.
Right. Yeah. Although they do roll.
Like this
exactly
is just, they're just playing pretend.
Yeah.
That's all they're doing is swinging sticks around and playing pretend.
Well, and what's so interesting.
The most normal ass thing for two kids in the woods
and
to do.
It's the sort of thing that Adventures in Odyssey theoretically encourages. This is the sort of imaginative play that the Imagination Station is supposedly built for.
It's exactly
I'm sorry, you need to go to the approved station to have imagination.
Right, no, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah, but you can't stand there too long. Connie's got a mop.
So
you need to know all about the American Revolution and other Bible stories.
So I have a little bit about the, because I think this is actually very well written. The way that Len is constantly digging into Jimmy and making him get into this. So we have them swinging the swords around in the woods.
Yep. Keep your eyes closed. Hold up your sword and listen.
Okay, what now?
I'm going to hit your sword with mine. It is the test.
Test?
Listen to the sound of the swords clashing.
Like, this is a scene from The Master.
What did you hear?
Two plastic swords hitting each other?
You have to concentrate, John Dell. These are not two plastic swords.
Len names Jimmy John
Dell. To the
Dell.
eye, maybe. But to the mind, they're real. Listen again.
No, I can't hear it.
The
and
grunt
again.
with each hit.
Wait.
And again, John Dell, listen.
Something's happening.
Again, do you hear it?
Ooh, what's that music?
Do you hear it?
It's the scene in The Master where Amy Adams is having Joaquin Phoenix look into her eyes and has the color of her eyes change just through the constant process of brainwashing. Len is brainwashing Jimmy, taking away his identity, forcing him to have a certain attitude about things that he himself doesn't have, and then forcing him to play with his imagination, which is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
What's also funny is, like, they would be making the sounds with their mouths.
Yeah.
Like, any kid playing around with swords is going to be like, ting, ting.
Yeah. It is weird that, like, Jimmy here, one, I'm actually like impressed with Jimmy's like kind of like mental guards against Len for most of this, because he's just like, man, this is fucking weird.
He's memorized so many Bible verses.
Yeah, his mind is a steel trap for the most part, but or steel fortress, I guess. But like, he's remarkably cogent about how weird this is, as opposed to most normal kids who are like, yeah, I know what it's like to play with a stick and pretend it's a sword or whatever. I understand this. I do this all the time. I'm literally a child. I do this probably
Jimmy
all the
lives
time.
purely within the rational world.
Yeah, like he's like, like Len's like, do you know what it's like to like pretend you have a sword? And he's like, yes, I'm like 10. I understand. I'm in fact, most things I have in life are imaginary.
But there seems to be some undercurrent of darkness going on. We hear it with that audio cue, and right after this, Whit is.
Here we go.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Whoa!
Whoa! Are you all right?
Yes, I am. I don't know what happened.
Looks like you had a slight attack of Butterfingers.
Oh, it's so curious.
Yeah, classic.
I was putting these glasses away and I suddenly felt bad.
Oh.
Almost as if something terrible is about to happen.
Came down with a case of bad.
Yeah, so this is my favorite thing, is that Jimmy getting into tabletop role-playing games is causing demons to torment John Avery Whitaker specifically.
He's felt a disturbance in the Lord here.
And this comes up, I mean, there's, I think, even a page or like a subhead on the AIO wiki about Whit and his spiritual gift for not premonitions, but feeling
discernment, like insight, whatever.
Yeah, you can't. They wouldn't be premonitions exactly.
He can see just beyond the veil.
Right.
Yeah. Whit is kind of, he really is. He's such the all-purpose patriarch, because he's like. He's like, oh yeah, kindly, it's like 65-year-old dude who has done. He's been a troop. He's been like a scientist. He's worked for the NSA.
Right.
He's also into books and stuff because that's
he's an
great.
archaeologist.
He's an archaeologist.
He was a teacher.
And also he's a fucking warrior of light defending. It's like it's like the people in This Present Darkness or other Frank Peretti books or something.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. He's the only thing standing between Odyssey and Hellmouth opening up underneath the town.
Yeah, basically. Maybe, and that's what happened in Connellsville.
Right.
Which comes in the form of them electing a Democrat.
Yeah.
So after Whit gets his not premonition, George, Jimmy's dad, is trying to be like, hey, Jimmy, what's going on with Len? And Len's being real dodgy about it. And Len tells Jimmy that, you can't talk about this. You can't. And so from here we go back into Whit praying again. He's praying about how something evil has arrived. He wants to know what it means.
It's a weird prayer.
It's a very weird prayer.
Because at first it's
an exposition, is
what
it is.
I think it's an intentional device where they want you to think that Whit is talking to somebody.
Yes.
Because it's very informal. It's not the way I would imagine Whit to pray.
No.
Because he's not a cool Christian.
No.
He's one of the lame ones.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh, okay, he's talking to God. This episode, I think the second episode diffuses this a bit, but the first episode is constantly just turning that ratchet.
Yeah.
It really is building the tension incredibly well. And so they're always making use of the sound like the clock that's in Whit's office or the slow droning sounds that they got from their new synthesizer.
It genuinely is very unnerving for a lot of it. I was surprised by how unnerved I was.
It's very oppressive, and it's especially so when you listen to this at age 8.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing for me that really held it back is that the music is cheesy still. It's very cheesy.
Yeah, they're still on the bridge. They still haven't fully transitioned over into better music.
But it is enough. And, at this point, then Len and Jimmy go out after hours, and Len is saying, hey, man, you want to move objects with your mind? You want to have the real power? And Jimmy, and actually, one of the guys that Len used to play with was a guy named Medwin the Miraculous, who could close his eyes.
Medwin.
He could close his eyes and
the mystery of Medwin Drood.
He could see shit from a bird's perspective, but Jimmy's not ready for that power yet.
Yeah. So here's my question.
Medwin can embed himself into the mind of a bird.
Yeah, I thought that was great. That's some and I was like, wait, that's the fucking Game of Thrones.
It has some nice specificity
like T.H. White,
to it.
Once and Future King. Yeah.
Well, it was so specific that made me go, okay, is that grabbing from something specifically?
I believe Into the Woods. You talk to birds.
Well, I would assume specifically it's drawing from Camelot, from the Merlin and King Arthur. And the sort of projection into a bird,
But I
literally thought that this was another one of those things, and a book came out and it said that.
I mean, it could be. It could be something that's in Mazes and Monsters where it's like someone became a bird.
But it was at this point in the episode where I sort of realized what the conceit of Castles and Cauldrons was and what the thesis was. And I'm like, wait, do they think that the magic is real?
Yes.
In these games? They think that...
Or close enough to being... Or you're just meddling with shit and opening a door to demons or whatever. You may not actually get magic,
AJ, demons themselves can and will enter this plane if you are carrying out these acts.
Right. Well,
yes.
This
is something they literally believe in, although it comes up in my experience, it came up very rarely. We did live in a rational Jimmy Barkley kind of world.
Sure.
But then Halloween would roll around and there would be someone's parents who were like, no, there's real stuff that people are doing. They'll do incantations over the candy at Walmart.
It's also worth noting that this shit isn't really in the Bible. There is some stuff in there.
There's the Witch of Endor, that one thing, which is kind of weird and no one reads that verse.
And then there's a Simon Magi or someone who shows up in the New Testament.
Right.
And he ends up burning his scrolls because he's like, I guess I won't do that anymore.
But there's nothing there's nothing like this kind of specificity about this idea. This was really something that was kind of invented by evangelical Christians in the late 80s, early 90s. Like you said, it was that Frank Peretti stuff, right? Of there's demons out there and they're real and they're not my friend. They're my enemy.
They're my friends.
Right. I was going to ask ye who grew up in this kind of culture, what was your interactions with this sort of thing?
Yeah.
As in adults kind of being like, no, this is real.
So,
this is a real thing.
It's interesting that you asked that because my dad was, and to an extent still is, very much a strong believer in this specific type of eschatology. And a lot of that is informed very much by Frank Peretti and his books. But also...
AJ, Frank Peretti is the evangelical Stephen King.
Yeah, that's the best way of describing it.
And Ted Decker is the Dean Koontz.
Great. Yeah. And again, he's not the rival barber to Sweeney Todd.
No.
Okay.
Yep. Not every Italian is the rival barber of Sweeney Todd, AJ.
I grew up Italian. I was surrounded by rival barbers.
AJ, you seem to have had, I don't know anything about your actual upbringing, but I appreciate how much of this is just you finding out horrible things that are going on.
That's pretty much the conceit of What's Endless Summer, or Ought to See You Next Fall was my other one I was going to pitch.
But yeah, so I have a very distinct memory of, I got recommended a book at the local library by the librarian there. He great guy. You know, he was one of the people who really encouraged not just my love of reading, but also really encouraging me to take the initiative to read new stuff and kind of discover my own taste in literature. And he suggested like a fantasy book, and I took it. I brought it home. My dad saw it, and he like sat me down later and was like, Josh, that book is connected to Dungeons and Dragons, and you know that is real spiritual stuff. You know, their spiritual warfare is real. And you need to be very careful about that sort of thing. And I don't remember if he actually forced me to bring it back to the library or not, but I didn't end up reading it. I do remember that.
So in my house, we were not, I mean, right, this kind of blew over a little bit. We were into the 90s, into the 2000s. But the urban legends around Dungeons and Dragons were alive and well. I remember friends talking about, oh yeah, there was this guy, you know, my cousin, his friend, somebody at his church, he was found, you know, he had hung himself in his house. And then when they went into his bedroom, they saw that he was playing a Dungeons and Dragons game on the computer, and the devil told him to kill himself through the computer. The message was still on the screen. I'm like, I think this is why I like the movie Pulse so much, because it's not even novel to me. I'm like, yeah, of course ghosts and demons live on the screen.
Of course, yeah.
How else they travel?
So, like, it was all still there. I remember watching The Smurfs, but then my mom got a little iffy about it. My parents were not, like, zealous about this kind of thing, although we didn't read Harry Potter in our house, which I honestly don't think I missed out at this point. But
yeah, no, I don't want to spoil it, but that didn't all turn out very well.
I mean, I read The Lord of the Rings. I read fantasy. I played JRPGs. We had Pokemon. That wasn't a problem. We didn't get Pokemon cards because my parents thought they were a scam. And you know what?
Yeah,
right.
Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
It would have paid off later on, though, if you'd hung on to them. I can tell you that much.
I still got them.
Sell them, AJ. Sell them.
Okay,
the market's hot. Sell them now.
Yeah, do it now. The bubble's gonna blow. The only trading cards I have are bootleg Yu-Gi-Oh cards I got at the Navajo Nation Fair in middle school. But that was the other thing. Is like I grew up in Gallup, New Mexico, which is a border town on the Navajo Nation, and there's a lot of tension between like traditional Navajo families and evangelical Christian.
Right.
And like my parents didn't have any issue with Halloween. My church didn't have any issue with that, although there were parents at church who did it. And my church did have an alternative thing. You could go do the fall festival at church.
The harvest party.
But they weren't like explicit about it being like, we're protecting children from the satanic wiles of Halloween. I would go trick-or-treating and then we'd go to church and get like more free candy.
Sure.
So it was a lot of give and take. But I definitely believe the background radiation. I mean, like, it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter, although I may not have been. It's that I never broached the idea of reading Harry Potter. Right. I read other things. I started reading The Jungle and Lord of the Flies, which, again, this ended up being better for me.
What about you, Scott? What was your experience with spiritual warfare?
My parents were similar. Like, my parents, like, got more, like, my parents were just very, like, kind of Reagan Democrats, Democrats like Obama, but they were Reagan, like kind of like they were like Mitt Romney Republican type folks who were just kind of moral majority-ish. This is like into mid to late 80s.
That's not dissimilar from my dad. He's a pro-Republican, but like similar vibes.
My mom was a Reagan Democrat. She was a Democrat all the way through Carter and then voted for Reagan and went Republican.
That whole thing. Yeah.
She was actually a part of the moral majority movement.
Yeah. So like, as I got older and we were actually going to like Christian schools and more involved in like that kind of culture, like they definitely absorbed that background radiation, particularly with media. They were like into my high school ages. Like I was like the one in my family that like shattered the ceiling of like listening to secular music that was loud. Kind kind of thing. Like that was a huge deal in my house.
Right.
But my parents were like not super, like they were weird because they didn't believe in like a lot of demons are all over the place, but they were very big into us not having satanic media. I don't know if it's because they thought it was demonic more that it would be a bad influence. They kind of were like, oh, it will, cause you to, off yourself in the steam tunnels, that kind of thing. But I was around the schools I went to and like every family I was around, and also all the media that my parents kind of gave us, like for example, Carmen. Who I brought up as
we need to do an episode about Carmen at some point.
Yeah, he was just like the ultimate punchline of that time. Like it was that thing that there are like witches everywhere, there are demons everywhere, and like I loved Halloween as a kid, but then I eventually, as I was growing up, like met families who were extraordinarily against Halloween. Like, and we also had the chapels that were like, and here are altars to whatever. And like in 4th grade, I remember my teacher telling us just straight out, an adult saying like, in public schools, you're not allowed to pray, and actually they'll arrest you if you try to pray.
Yeah.
And
my God. Yeah.
Now you can also make an offering to a goddess if you want, but you can't say Jesus' name or else you'll get expelled. You can go to the boiler room and actually they'll have an altar where you can make an offering of a small animal.
Right.
And like I'm like 9 and I'm like, holy shit. And it was that kind of stuff. I remember my friend Ryan's mom was like, I used to be a witch and was into all this kind of shit back when I lived in wherever, and she didn't say all this kind of shit. That would be funny though. But and she was like, oh, like when Ryan, who's like my friend, was born, like Satan tried to like pop up and steal him, and then at one point
I hate it when that happens. I really hate it when that happens.
He's like, I need this kid in particular for whatever. But and
Ryan,
at one point
I need
she
you
was
for my
like,
mission.
yeah. It was an Omen type situation. She was like, yeah, I was on one side of the house and I just felt God saying like, go to the other side of the house. And I went and there was nothing there. And then like when I came back though, like there was a demon that was like coming up the stairs to where I had just been, which is kind of like a funny turn of events where it's like God's like, hey, get out of there. There's about to be a demon that pops up in your room. And then you get up there and then like you just walk out there and the demon's just like, you're like, kind of up the stairs. And we were,
demons love stairs though.
Yeah.
Like they're always on stairs.
They're just hanging out there because they're
they got to get their steps in.
Yeah, they got their little demon Fitbits, but but yeah, so it was that kind of thing. And then like when I was like an adult, like I had kind of stopped believing that this stuff was real by the time I was in like later in high school, at least not like literally. But as an adult, again, back when I was, this is actually literally one of the things that made me eventually lose my faith was being around a lot of adults and being around this from the adult angle and just seeing how this affected people's lives and these kinds of beliefs. And a lot of times it was like a lot of like pretty just desperate people who were like, I need an explanation for why this thing happened.
Right.
But a lot of it literally was just white suburban people coming up with things to be scared of. It was that QAnon type thing where it's like we have a very reactionary bent to this that we need to spiritualize in some way. And this provides the reason why we can be terrified. So I've seen like a lot of like exorcism type stuff. And just people going like, I had a dream about this, and that means like a demon was here, and just there was just a lot of it. Because again, a lot of the way that people talk a lot about sort of Christian faith is that the real kind is the kind of progressive, don't take it literally. This is just kind of like a fun. It's the John Fugel saying, like, "Hey, Republicans, maybe if you read the Bible, you'd know that Jesus would have voted for Biden or something like that." Like, people are like, "Oh no, but like that stuff that those other people believe, that's not real Christianity. Real Christianity is this more cosmopolitan, metaphorical stuff." And it's like, no, there's lots and lots of people for whom this is like a real life and death struggle every single day.
I like there being this idea of like Calvinism, Arminianism, and Fugel-Sangianism.
I refuse to allow this podcast to devolve into a conversation about John Fugelsang.
Sorry.
I refuse.
See, that's the unholiness I've actually
he and
brought
Daisy
into
Fuentes
this.
were the best America's Funniest Home Videos hosts, bar none. Like way better than Bob Saget, and Tom Bergeron can go fuck himself.
Let's get back into Adventures in Odyssey. I want to wrap up.
No. I need to talk about Tom Bergeron for a second. One of the worst motherfuckers who has ever invaded.
We're not.
Like that's a demon. That was a demon that was raised from a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Not even a good ritual that actually raises like cool demons, because he sucks shit.
Right.
And he was on every fucking TV show. He was hosting everything. It was like how Charlie Rose was just all of a sudden doing news everywhere and flashing everybody. Except that Tom Bergeron wasn't doing that because he probably doesn't even have genitals. He's not like a living being of any kind.
But one thing that is a living being of any kind is...
A fun fact is that Tom Bergeron's genitals is just a smaller Tom Bergeron who waves at you.
Okay, so back to the episode, right?
Flavorless.
Donna, Jimmy's sister.
For God's sake,
her doll
Donna
has had its arms ripped off. What's going on?
Yeah, now, sure has.
George
it's an antique collector's doll.
And George takes a look at it. What was interesting is that, like, in terms of dramatically, George should have immediately been like, Jimmy, what the fuck did you do?
Right.
And instead he's like, no, there's no way that Jimmy or Len, the child I know is extremely troubled and that's why he's staying with us. There's no way they could have hurt your doll, Donna.
Right. These
you
are
were
the
being
telltale
hysterical.
marks of a cat.
Right.
It was Ferguson.
You are a woman and you were
the cat.
speaking up too much.
That belongs to your dead friend.
But
and then Len implies that he has somehow astral projected into Ferguson the cat
which I
and scratched up the doll
I
himself.
love that.
Hell yeah.
Between this and the previous episode, there's a lot of adults going, hey, stop being so suspicious of each other. And whereas this show is fucking just paranoia all over. It is small town white Christian paranoia, like, to a T. And it's just funny how, like, both of these are like, no, you always want to assume the best when it comes to, for example, thieving or demons.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
So Len's like, hey, Jimmy, you want to see some real magic? And that's like the end of part one.
So Jimmy sets up some candles, which are, of course, just like the big telltale symbol.
Right.
Like whenever these Dungeons & Dragons news stories happen, it's like, this kid committed suicide. Also, there were candles in his room.
There were some candles. They were black.
Yeah. The law enforcement guides, they're like, if you see red and black candles...
They're anti-fascist.
They're part of the demon cult known as Antifa.
What are the candles for?
Effect. I like candles. I like the shadows they make.
I think they're kind of creepy.
That's right, Jimmy.
Jimmy thinks they're creepy. John Dell likes them.
Jimmy thinks they're creepy.
Yep.
Jimmy, be scared of candles. Stay away from the papists. And Len starts to tell Jimmy...
Tests are nothing once you've mastered castles and cauldrons. Things change. Life changes. Mine has.
Sounds like it.
I've been able to do things myself.
Yeah? What kind of things?
I can suck my own dick.
It's one of
Castles and Cauldrons.
One of the many wonders of Castles and Cauldrons.
And then, so we end up in episode 2 of this.
Yeah. And now they're being hunted down by an organization called the Wizards of Kith. And I'm assuming these are just hype beasts, right?
I mean, the other thing is that, like, Len really makes this sound so cool. Like, this sounds like a thing that I want to be a part of. I want magic. Yeah. I want the ability to talk to birds.
That's the allure. That's the danger.
The counter to that, though, is that Len is just fucking annoying.
Yeah, he's a bad guy.
He just sucks to hang out with.
Sucks. It just sounds like he's bad at teaching this game.
And again,
I would never want this guy DMing my game.
That McCusker has tapped into really well is that Len is using all of these really hallmark manipulation strategies. Right. So Len, at the beginning of this episode, is constantly testing Jimmy's loyalty to Castles and Cauldrons. It's like, you left the game, you wanted to pause the game and go to Wit's End. Aren't you dedicated? Don't you want to accomplish something? Don't you care? Don't you care about me? Don't you love, like...
I will say, though, at this point, as a game, I'm very confused about the baseline rules of Castles and Cauldrons.
Right. The mechanics of this have not been made clear
Scott,
to me.
You just swing your swords around and then you summon a demon, is I think all it really is.
This is something that I wanted to briefly touch on, if you're willing to talk about it, Scott. As a game designer, tell me your thoughts about Castles and Cauldrons.
Castles and Cauldrons, it either has the worst rules or the greatest rules that ever created. I don't know, because there's no it is the kind of this sort of it's the the kind of tabletop RPG version of when you see someone in a TV show and they're playing, they're clearly playing Grand Theft Auto 3 or something, and they're like, I just need to do this and then I get to the next level. I got to beat the level, and they're just banging on the controller this, just every button. And they're like, oh, sweet, I got to the next level, and it's just...
I just earned 1,000 points!
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's that version of it where it's we've kind of internalized that these are certain things that sort of happen, but I think that the reality of D&D is just not interesting. It's not. It is that's the whole thing. It completely takes place inside people's heads, and half the time it's just a bunch of people goofing off, and all that. So like you have to really invent a way that this is interesting, and like that kind of like hushed tones of like, we're gonna go do this and we're gonna do that, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure that takes place a little bit, but it is certainly not the rule. And also generally what's happening in these kinds of games is not people going and trying to induct their younger cousin into it like it's a fucking cult or whatever, like it's some sort of esoteric like order or whatever.
Well, also, what kind of campaign have you ever heard of that can be played with 2 guys? That's ridiculous.
Well, it's like 2 guys doing LARPs in the. I'm like, I think this is they're just playing around. I don't know that there's any sort of like rules to this.
They're just fucking around.
Yeah, you're not doing weird cousin.
They're just holding plastic swords the whole time.
Yeah, your cousin showed up. And he had a real particular idea of how he was going to spend his summer, and you just happened to be the guy nearby. He was like, this summer, I'm going to go out into the woods, and I'm going to talk like this a whole bunch, and I'm going to do this, and it's going to be great. And then you just happened to be the poor schmuck that was around for it. Like, as far as I can tell,
that is the cousin experience.
Yeah,
that is the perfect experience of hanging out with your cousin.
But I think then maybe it's those like hushed tones that are fucking Whit up so badly, because he's still really freaked out at this point.
Yeah. So Len and Jimmy, they show up at Whit's End, and then Donna shows up and she's like, "My doll disappeared.
Right.
Where's my doll?" And Jimmy's like, "I was already vindicated. It was already proven that the cat scratched your doll. So get fucked, Donna. Go home and get fucked."
But Whit is like a missing doll. What's going on here? Something is weird.
I must insert
and then he
myself.
Otherwise, like, does not participate in this. He just sort of stands off to the side of this entire argument that takes place.
And then Len, after this whole back and forth, Len says one of the most accurate things that anybody has ever said in this show, which is basically saying like, this Whit guy is incredibly creepy.
Yep.
I didn't say I didn't like him. I just said he's creepy, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly. He's a fairly likable guy who is nonetheless very creepy.
Yeah. We call them the interferers, I think, is what Len says. I'm like, yeah, no, that's him.
Yeah.
I also love this conversation because Jimmy's like, man, fuck Donna.
But also truly fuck Donna.
And Len is also, I want to be like, Len is having sex with the doll.
100%.
He's putting the doll on, around, and partly inside his dick. And
sorry. Anyway,
unfortunate.
Yeah, it's got a pointy nose. Anyway, so Len then says his best line, which is, I think, actually very accurate to this type of guy.
Girls. You can't live with them, and you can't live with them.
Len is on your side, man.
Len is a man going his own way.
I immediately knew that guy who is like 15 or whatever, and was just coming out with shit like that. And I'm like, have you spoken to a woman in your life? Like, what is this? Other than sort of like, regurgitating misogyny you heard from your dad or saw on TV, like the whole premise of those kinds of like shitty misogyny lines is, I am world weary of women.
Me the 15-year-old.
I've been through so much already. It's like that kind of like, you're down at the bar,
right?
Being like, you're back in here, are you, Steve? And you're like, women. Blah, blah.
I mean, he's role playing, right? That's what he's doing in this moment. He's role playing.
Yeah, and I think it's like just for a long, long time in American culture, the funniest thing in the world was like hating your spouse. Mm-hmm. For some reason. And I think that, that's part of just general misogyny. But that guy, as soon as he said that, I was like, I'm just flashing back to that kid I knew in high school who would just come out with stuff like this, and we just look at him like,
well, I think that's the thing that's interesting to me about Len is that he's actually, setting aside the conceit of this episode, which is very weird and doesn't make sense.
Weird.
The character of Len himself is a very believable guy.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. 100%.
And when you, like Paul McCusker in 1990, are operating under the assumption that all of these things in these books are true, like that monologue at the end of the Dracula play, right? Such things are real. Which is the entire point of this episode, then you can write a fully realized, not three-dimensional, but you can write a fully realistic type of guy into this completely outlandish, absurd, idiotic story.
Which posits that Wizards of the Coast is run by a demon
who is
several. or several demons.
At least they have a board of directors. So,
there's a Carmen song where Satan specifically talks about how Dungeons and Dragons is part of their general their general operation. I believe it's in
that's the one where he goes
Land.
to visit the witch at his house.
Witch's Invitation.
Witch's Invitation fucking slaps.
Yeah, that
which also does mention
Dungeons
and Dragons.
board and Dungeons and Dragons games on his table.
Yes.
He's a witch, and he basically brings Carmen in to be like, so fuck you.
Right.
And Carmen defeats him with facts and logic.
Right.
He goes like full Aaron Sorkin protagonist on him.
To his house to go, hey, come and fight me with spirits, Carmen. And then he goes there and he basically boasts about how he curses people with AIDS and plays Dungeons and Dragons and shit.
I will say that I genuinely believed you were all talking about Carmen Sandiego for the first 2.5 hours of this podcast.
Yeah.
His name is spelled Carman.
And he died in February.
He passed away recently.
Yeah.
He has gone to be with the Lord in New Jersey.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, he was just on tour, too.
Yeah.
No, he was on tour to pay for his, he had cancer.
Yeah, he had cancer real bad. He went back on tour to pay for cancer treatment and then died in February. It's a bummer.
Which is sad. Kind of basically promoted some of the worst shit on earth for decades, but still sucks.
Yeah.
Well, so that scene with Lennon, his misogyny, ends with an absolutely hilarious music cue.
Oh yeah. Can you play that? You have that?
Yep. It's just gonna get louder and higher.
Yeah.
I have an idea.
To be fair,
I don't know. We have to make it scary.
To be fair, effective. Very effective.
You don't see it coming.
All the song cues, all the music cues in the show are just so fucking either optimistic or oh, this is a sentimental, cozy moment we're having, or maybe a little sad. Or something.
That sound just blasts me back to I had a Yamaha keyboard growing up as a kid and playing around with the little choral voice patch on the anyway.
And so Whit is labeled an interferer, a suppressive person, and so Len says the way to deal with that is with Shulman because we've done it before.
There was a woman who turned into an interferer, and the warriors of Moorhaven had to drive her off.
How did they do that?
How else? By magic.
Ha! What did you do? Turn her into a frog?
Don't be stupid. There are more important ways to use magic. Shulman will show us.
Shulman? What's a Shulman?
He's the one who comes to help the game players.
Right.
He helps keep castles and cauldrons alive.
So, Castles and Cauldrons is run by a literal demon under the earth.
Right.
Like a guy living in a pit, a red-robed, faceless being that works directly under the devil.
Yeah, according to the mythology of the kind of Christianity of this point, of this type, Shulman's an actual dude.
He's an entity,
He's an actual entity.
In much the same way, to go back to Frank Peretti briefly, in those Frank Peretti books, all of the things that influence the ACL, the stand-in for the ACLU, for instance, are actual demons perching on the backs of these lawyers being like, you need to make people have more abortions.
All that shit is so, because demons are behind everything, but a lot of it is just anti-Semitic, War of Gold thing. They're like, the demons that made them Jewish. It's recycling all this old and barely contained, bigotry. Barely contained, those cosmopolitan lawyers, kind of thing, and that's brought on
or
by
Left
demons.
Behind, where it's the UN and Nikolai Carpathia.
I just find it to be so hypocritical that they take such a hard stand against magic when the main deity of Christianity is just a magician.
That's not magic, okay? That's miracles from the Lord.
Yeah.
He
walks
the
on
deeper
water.
magic from before the dawn of time. Thank you.
He's a paladin, not a magician. Thank you.
I see. I'm sorry. He's a cleric. He is a cleric.
He's a cleric.
He's a war cleric. He can flip tables.
Yeah, he does healing magic.
He's a white mage, not a dark mage.
Now Len is actually going to bring up Beelzebub, Belial, and Mastema from the hierarchies of hell itself, which leads us to them performing a ritual. Blood is shed. The doll plays a part in this. for some reason.
And things are about to get really good.
And we actually hear the voice of the demon being summoned.
The demon is coming out of the crowd. I'm like, oh yeah, come out. Just
let's
throw
go.
some shit up.
Let's go.
Just come on, let's do this.
And
then the entire show takes a turn.
He's come. I didn't need your stupid hand.
No, I don't believe it.
Showman! Showman!
No, I won't believe it. I won't believe it.
What's going on here?
Mr. Whitaker.
Jimmy, is everything all right?
And Jimmy is saved. The portal is closed simply by the presence of a patriarchal
Yeah, Wit just
figure.
shows up and closes the
In fact,
Hellmouth single-handedly.
The ice cream guy and the nuclear family have come to seal the gates of hell once more and bring order back to the
so
world.
often happens.
As so often
ice cream
happens.
guy.
All you need is the ice cream guy and a dad.
Yeah, I did find it weird that in the scene right before this, when they were driving to this spot and Donna stuck her head out the window and was beheaded, like that kind of felt a little out of place to me.
That was a little weird. They pay it off like 50 episodes later, though. So,
cool. Okay,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
That thing we were talking about with the patriarchal, because like Whitaker is also like he's already in these episodes already been like literally someone's stand-in father.
I mean, yeah, most characters, they don't have a family as far as like what the audience sees.
It's
really just the Barclays.
Yeah, and the Rathbones.
And the Rathbones, I guess.
Yeah,
but the Rathbones
are the wrong kind of family.
Well, they're Jewish. That's why.
I'm standing the Rathbones. But I mean that is kind of the thing. Like that was one of the things that really struck me going back to this, having not listened to any Adventures in Odyssey since the goddamn 90s.
Right.
Was just like really running on lots of memories. So I'm really glad I re-upped here.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that kind of very specific sort of like extremely reactionary right-wing bullshit.
Yeah.
But done through it is I feel like it's this kind of thing that it would be hard to start doing something like this today, because that you need that 80s 1950s like throwback Americana. You need that kind of you need the shit that like really bad pop country songs are about, how it's just like, oh, where I'm from, things are still basically like this idealized version of white people 1950s, and you need that where it's like everyone is a ethical small business owner or is a hardworking Joe who's a window washer and somehow then has a 3-story house, like a 3-story restored Victorian on the corner across the street from the grassy park where they have their bicentennial celebration and that sort of thing. Everyone knows each other. Like that whole like the fucking baseball team.
Nothing has ever gone wrong. This place, they ran off.
It's everything.
They ran off the pagan Indians, and then they have built this town.
Right.
And AJ, we haven't played the episode for you when Wits End is started. Like the original house that was built on that property begins, and it gets raided by the local, completely unnamed tribe.
Oh God.
But like,
I don't think I ever
it's a
heard
Manifest
that one.
Destiny fantasy. And that's the interesting thing, Scott, is that at this time, Focus on the Family had the resources to make something like this that wasn't doing stuff like this usually on its face. In today's Christian entertainment ecosphere, this stuff has to play everything immediately on its political face. It has to be stuff like God's Not Dead, Part 4.
Sorbo's Revenge.
And it has to be movies about how Christmas is not allowed to happen anymore. And none of this has any sort of finesse to it whatsoever. But really, Odyssey is masking more reactionary politics than a lot of the Christian movies that are coming out now. But they're just so much more clever with it, except in this episode.
One of the things that's interesting about this, and this is kind of like a foundational myth of particularly settler colonialist shit in general, but like there's this kind of like valorization of the kind of settlers that came out and so forth. But then as soon as it was established, it might as well have been an eternal sanctuary for this one sort of thing. And so in Odyssey,
we've always been here.
It might as well be just eternal, and most, if not all, of the real problems have to come from the outside. They have to be it is Nova Corp, it is like fucking what's his name? It's the fucking Red Scorpion terrorist group.
A cousin from out of town.
It's this kid. It's like it's all these things that like have to come in, and then people come into town and are new and are kind of sort of tested in the sense of like Eugene might as well have just caught Christianity as if it was COVID or something. He was just around it too much. Same thing with Connie. And it's like that demonstrates whether you are a good person, essentially, is whether you can come to this place and become a part of this sort of permanent stability.
Yeah.
Katrina even uses that metaphor at one point where she says she can't keep dating Eugene because he's not a Christian. She says, it's because you've been exposed to just enough Christianity that you have perhaps become immune to it.
Right.
So that idea of infection is absolutely part of all of this.
It's so core to all of these episodes, this sort of like mythos of this kind of town that just has never existed on Earth.
It never will.
Yeah.
And it never will.
It's the last stop at Willoughby.
Yeah. It is exactly that. It is such a, and it's a kind of like ideal that I don't know that exists in that sort of way anymore, because it has not existed for so long that no generation, I don't think, can remember the time that you were supposed to be throwing back to now.
Right.
That's right.
It kind of reminds me of when I was at an airport not too long ago. There was a sign that was put up by DHS that said, like, it was something to the effect of, like, remember how things were? And this is naked propaganda. This is flying during the Trump administration. There was like a little girl holding her hand over her, white girl, obviously, holding her hand over her heart, looking at the American flag. This is like an archival photo from the 50s or something.
Fuck me.
And seeing that, I was like, oh yeah, this is the dream. This is the thing they're fighting to preserve. But it's not real. It never was real. You're taking
that girl did not want to be pledging allegiance to that flag.
Well, and it's like also little white girls hold their hand on their chest in front of the flag currently.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is happening right now. It didn't go away. To whatever degree it was there, it's still there.
But they have to invent a boogeyman. They have to be the victim in some way.
And now the only throwback that any of them have, and it didn't really succeed, was 9/12.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. Like, there is so much, as we record this, like right before 9/11. Sorry to anyone who's listening to this and is like the breaking the illusion that this was recorded the day you're listening to it. But it was that thing that now, like, that kind of like mythology is something like 9/11, where it's like we all came together, and it's like we fucking did not.
We absolutely did not.
That was not a thing at all. Like, that was part of the, and you see it kind of, both in political and also I think in a lot of like the pundit class who were like, that was back when we all felt really vital and connected. And it's like, that's not a reality. That's a personal vibe.
Yeah. Well, it also like fucking tell any Muslim living in Dearborn in 2001 that America was more united than ever. Fuck off.
Even like the fucking much vaunted first responders got super fucked over by the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
It was like, and that's the thing, because like America, probably other countries too, but America in particular, like it wants its idealized kind of like idols. It wants characters, but it doesn't actually want any sort of humans that need anything out of it. Like no one is. Everyone's supposed to be giving. No one is supposed to be needing anything.
Well, and that's to bring it back to Odyssey. Like that's John Avery Whittaker, right? He needs nothing. He has the prime real estate in the town. He has all the social connections. He has the backing of the United States, maybe both the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. Maybe, not clear.
Both.
What is going on in that basement?
He is stuck into some shit. There's a magical mineral down. Anyway, whatever. I won't get into it.
Yeah. AJ hasn't gotten to the mineral thing yet.
It's wild later on.
Or the body that's found in the basement.
Currently, I think there's a Minotaur down there.
there.
Like I just think it's House of Leaves, and underneath is just like an endless maze.
Wits End might as well be a House of Leaves type scenario for how much shit is in that place and how much they just keep adding on to it.
Yes.
Imagination Station eventually seats like 20 people or something.
They built an expansion for it like 5 years ago or something.
Anyway, I guess we really are. We've been rolling for quite a while now. And Scott, thank you so much for all of your time.
Yeah, I'm very grateful.
Oh, no problem. This was great. Like I said, I never get to talk about any of this stuff ever, so it's like this is just cursed knowledge I carry around.
And I think that's kind of
and it's good to expel it every once in a while.
Yeah. And this is kind of the last thing, and feel free to take this briefly or go on a little bit. I started recording this stuff with Brian and AJ, these Wits Endless Summer episodes, starting a couple months ago. I had a lot of memories of Adventures in Odyssey. I then did not listen to it for approximately 15 to 20 years. And then I picked it back up again. Listening to it again now, all of a sudden, without the rose-tinted nostalgia glasses, I'm seeing a very different show from the show that I grew up listening to on road trips, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you? What's coming to the fore with you?
Well, aside from some of, I guess, the stuff I was saying before about just kind of the small town, like, reactionary, the kind of, like, soft focus, this is the reaction of we are in a safe place that is no longer safe type of thing.
Yeah.
This kind of obsession with this safety and this sort of internal goodness of the people that is kind of given to them by God, but also just / enacted by them. I was actually surprised at how charming I found some of it. Like it comes down to the cast is just very good. Like it's just a very good cast, and it's, for what it is, very well written. For Christian media of this sort, it's stellar for that market. It made me remember a lot of other episodes that actually I remember being meaningful to me. Like the Karen episode, I just remember crying about that when I was a kid. It's a genuinely heartbreaking episode. And like a few other things. The one where like Eugene and they go on like a fucking like mission for like archaeology looking for like some sort of thing in like with the Aztecs, and there's all these different things that it reminded me of the time when I was listening to it, and this honestly did seem like, oh, this actually does seem sort of like adventurous, and this town seems really cool, and it's not like my town, which is the reality of a town like that. I think it was also just making me think of that particular moment of conservatism that still exists a little bit, but like in the post-Trump era, like James Dobson left Focus on the Family last year or 2 years ago to start something, quote, that could be more openly political, which is hilarious. And he came out and was like a big Trump supporter, and it is just it really does kind of lay this whole thing bare of the like the endless talk about family, which was just the watchword, like that was the buzzword of that time, and it's like. Family means this, family. And it was this obsession with family just as a topic, as a stand-in for a kind of reactionary capitalist hegemony. And this ideal, this completely fake ideal to sell it to people forever. It's this is the history that you have lost that has been taken from you. And you need to go take it back by doing all this actual violence to people. Or supporting it. And I do wonder if kids raised in this now get that same pitch in the sense of like, this is how you get safety back. And actually safety was not very long ago. And in fact, it's there, but it's slipping away due to Antifa, MS-13, Sharia law.
Well, forgot about MS-13.
And obviously the tremendous irony of the fact that in terms of safety, actual crime has been on a precipitous decline over the course of the past couple decades. So, like, how do you scare people?
It reminded me a little bit of also
like since like 1990, really.
Yeah. It's been going on for a while, and so the it just kind of reminded me of getting kind of like safety pilled, for lack of a better word. That sort of paranoia that you have something precious that was once there and seemed to be everlasting, and now it's being taken away from you, you know, by like, you know, what are they teaching the kids in the school? They're teaching that like our founding was actually bad. And like that's the shit that when I was in like a kid in the 90s, like all this like kind of like critical race theory stuff, I'm like, this is literally exactly what I was taught. It was just under different, it was relativism or secularism, or before that it was communism and feminism. Before that it was something else, and like postmodernism, etc. Now it's critical race theory. They reskin this every half decade or so. And so I think it was just that kind of like reminder of this particular flavor of cultural conservatism and just relentless capitalist ideology sold as this sort of rock that everyone can and should stand on, but is being eroded by everyone's proverbial cousin coming with actual fucking demons in tow and possessing your cat, or stealing your daughter away with their baseball playing wiles.
Well,
and just kind of remembering all the other places that show goes, like the fact that it does like the NSA, I think it's the NSA.
Yes, the NSA.
Yeah, are like straight up
I love that too, because I thought as a kid I didn't know what the NSA was because the CIA gets all the press.
Nobody knows what the NSA is.
I thought that they had made up an agency for the show that was fictional. They're like, no. This is the NSA, which is based and cool.
I don't know that the show is ever critical of it at all. It's a kind of
the show is was never critical of the United States government in any regard.
Where now Whit's grandson, Monty Whitaker Dowd, is a member of the Secret Service and probably also the NSA.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's that thing where, like, in the same way that, like, you have people like Whit who are these kind of soldiers of God, who are there to both tell you who to date and not to date for your own good, but in a nice way, in kind of like an old comfortable baseball glove, if could talk way. But also there to protect you from the evils of the world, and also is a self-made entrepreneur. And it's this very particular kind of Protestant, for the most part, Christian capitalist viewpoint.
And it's it's not just the belief that like somebody like that, like society just simply has to allow for the capitalist to become benevolent. It's that the only person that could ever actually be benevolent enough, be a good enough person, would have to be this business.
Of course, well, because they're the Randian prime movers, right? They're the ones who make it happen.
Right. They're the fucking like Thomas Jefferson farmers. They're the I'm self-sufficient. Given the even playing field, I will become self-sufficient, basically.
Yeah.
And I will create a wit's end that literally has a micro universe that will take you back to see any Bible story you want / any part of our history that Christians kind of see as a Bible story, such as the American Revolution or the Gettysburg Address or something like that. Like, it is.
I will build a wit's end so tall that it will touch heaven, and I will meet God.
God will look down and notice us again.
Well, Scott, was there anything that you wanted to pitch or just talk about before we wrap up here?
Let's talk about Satan.
Do you want to announce the new game right here? Circulation.
I'm actually under NDA, so I'm not allowed to say anything. I can confirm that it does use buttons.
Oh shit!
Okay. Wonderful.
That's actually that's the worst of all possible world's exclusive. You heard it here first, folks.
The game will include buttons.
It will be played on video devices.
Oh my god!
Video, such as an Imagination Station.
So this is
that's the announcement.
The game is confirmed. Imagination Station console exclusive.
This will not be a LARP in the forest.
Yeah, it will take you straight to hell or heaven, depending on your particular on where you are at with the Lord at that moment. You will either see your dead wife or you will go right to hell.
Awesome.
Spoilers. Anyway.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. We really appreciate you and had a lot of fun. Until next time, I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I am the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm Scott.
Go on and have sex with your sister's doll.
But right in the pee hole. Just right.
Oh, no.
Stick it right in.
Sound like put it in your urethra.
Okay. So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Well, there you have it, folks. Don't play tabletop RPGs or LARPs or exercise at all. Don't do board games of any kind. Monopoly, Candyland, throw it out. Satan, Satan, Satan. Exercise, Satan. Play video games instead, like, I don't know, say Night in the Woods. Scott doesn't need me to tell you this, and you probably don't need me to tell you this, but it is a very good game, and you should play it if you haven't. Anyway, thanks again to Scott Benson for joining us for this episode, and thanks to Brendan Dalton for providing us with our music. And thank you to our patrons at Patreon, without whom this wouldn't be possible. And they include Aeneas Hemphill, Ari Rodriguez, Ben Ferber, Benjamin R. Alford, Bill Corby, Davis Van de Steeg, Dominic Russo, Nate Netzley, Nell Johnson, Octavia Immersive, Olivia Hernandez, Trevor Strunk, with a special thank you to Ashley Stoneman, Hannah White, Nikola Donov, Sam Borman, and Timmy Sexton. All right, folks, keep your soul safe.
You need to cut right from that to, like, Chris giving the wrap-up, like, moral of the story.
The book of Deuteronomy says that putting things in your urethra is the only way that you can get truly close to God.